Hello guys, welcome to God of Fiction. Today we have an incredible story for you. What if Harry claimed 5 legendary lordships at age 11 and evicted Dumbledore from the Headmaster's office? If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, The Inheritance. The cupboard under the stairs smelled like dust and old wood and the particular staleness of air that hasn't moved in years. Harry Potter had slept in it for as long as he could remember, which was long enough that he'd stopped thinking of it as strange. It was simply where he was kept, the way shoes were kept in a shoe rack and umbrellas were kept by the door. He was a thing the Dursleys stored, and the cupboard was his storage space. He was 10 years old for another 4 hours and 16 minutes, according to the glow-in-the-dark watch he'd found in a bin outside the school last autumn and fixed with a paperclip and determination. He knew the exact time because he always knew it. Knowing the time was one of the few things in his life that was entirely his, something Dudley couldn't take, something Uncle Vernon couldn't lock away. He lay on his thin mattress and stared at the sloped ceiling 2 feet above his face and thought about nothing in particular, which was the other skill he'd mastered in this cupboard. Thinking about nothing was easier than thinking about the things he wasn't allowed to think about. But something was different tonight. He'd felt it building for the past week, the way you feel a thunderstorm before it arrives, a pressure in the air, a buzzing at the edge of sensation, like every nerve in his body was slowly waking up from a very long sleep. He'd ignored it, mostly, because ignoring things was also something he was very good at. But tonight the buzzing was loud, almost musical, and it wasn't fading. It got louder at midnight. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. It crept up the way dawn does. One moment the world was dark, and then, almost without Harry noticing the transition, something inside his chest was singing. He sat up so fast he cracked his head on the ceiling. "Ow," he said, very quietly, because saying things loudly in the middle of the night was how you ended up locked in the cupboard for a week instead of just sleeping in it voluntarily. He pressed his palm to his sternum, certain for a wild moment that something was happening to his heart. But it wasn't his heart. It was deeper than that, more central, as though whatever was happening was occurring at the level of his bones, or maybe the level of whatever made him him. Then the letters arrived. Not slid under the door. Not dropped through the mail slot. They appeared, and that was the only word for it, because one moment there was nothing and the next moment there were 5 envelopes hovering in the air of his cupboard, each one sealed with a different crest, each one glowing very faintly with a color unique to itself. Gold. Silver. Deep green. Dark red. And the last one in a pale, cold blue-white that made him think of starlight. Harry stared at them. They hovered patiently. He reached out and took the gold one first, because gold seemed least threatening. The moment his fingers closed around it, the buzzing in his chest became a chord, 5 notes at once, harmonizing, and then resolving into something that felt like recognition. Like a door being unlocked from the inside. The envelope unsealed itself. The parchment inside unfolded. The words on it were not printed or written. They were burned into the page, letter by letter, as though written for him specifically in this moment, by right of blood, lineage, magic, and the ancient compact, the lordship of the most noble house of Potter is hereby recognized and claimed. The heir has come of age by magical reckoning. The house answers. Harry read it 3 times. Then he looked at the other 4 envelopes and thought, with the particular clarity that comes at midnight on the edge of something enormous, "Oh. This is going to be a lot, isn't it?" He took the silver one. Peveril, it said on the outside, in script so old the letters looked like they'd been carved rather than written. By right of survival, sacrifice, and the enduring mark of death's acknowledgement, the lordship of the ancient and honored house of Peveril is hereby recognized and claimed. Death has been met and departed. The heir has been measured. The house answers. The deep green one said Slytherin. He hesitated over that one, then picked it up anyway. By right of the Parseltongue gift, the blood mark of the Dark Lords failed working, and the ancient law of conquest and survival, the lordship of the noble and ancient house of Slytherin is hereby recognized and claimed. The heir has borne the mark and outlasted its maker. The house answers. The dark red one was Gryffindor. By right of blood descent through the Potter maternal line, traced and proven through 7 generations to Godric Gryffindor himself, the lordship of the noble and ancient house of Gryffindor is hereby recognized and claimed. The founder's blood has returned. The house answers. He held the pale, cold one for a long time before he opened it. Something about it made him feel very small and very large at the same time. The crest on the seal was a design he didn't recognize, a coiled dragon surrounding a tower, with a single star at the top. By right of the grand convergence, 5 bloodlines meeting in one living vessel for the first time in recorded history, the lordship of the House of Emrys, dormant these 914 years, is hereby recognized, reawakened, and claimed. The line of Merlin has returned. The old magic stirs. The house answers. Harry sat in his cupboard with 5 lordship letters in his hands and the taste of lightning in his mouth and thought, Merlin. Then he thought, I wonder if they deliver breakfast to Lord Emrys, or if he still has to cook it himself. The buzzing in his chest laughed at him. He was fairly sure that was his imagination, but it was a warm sort of laughter, so he didn't mind. He didn't sleep. He read the letters 4 more times each, sat with the buzzing that was now a steady settled warmth, and by the time grey light started seeping under the cupboard door, he'd made a list. He was good at lists. Lists were how you organized things you couldn't control into things you could understand. The list said, Gringotts. Today. Before anyone knows. He understood, in the way clever people understand things without being told directly, that this was not information the Dursleys could know about. Not because he intended to hide it from them long term, that thought gave him a particular satisfaction that surprised him with its sharpness, but because he needed to understand it himself first. You didn't show your hand before you knew what you were holding. At 7 in the morning, Aunt Petunia unlocked the cupboard door and told him to make breakfast, and he did it without complaint, and he served Dudley his eggs without a word, and he ate his own smaller portion standing at the counter because there was no chair for him at the table, and the whole time the 5 lordship letters sat folded in the waistband of his hand-me-down trousers and the warmth in his chest was a secret that was entirely, completely his. Boy, Uncle Vernon said, without looking up from his newspaper, don't think just because it's your birthday that you get a day off. The garden needs, I'm going into London, Harry said. The sentence arrived in the kitchen like a stone thrown through a window. Even Dudley looked up. Vernon's face did the thing it usually did when Harry said something unexpected, it cycled rapidly through red, redder, and dangerous purple. I beg your pardon. London, Harry said, in a tone he'd never quite used before. The warmth in his chest was helping. I have business there. I'll be back before dark. You'll be back. Vernon stood up, chair scraping back. You don't have business, you ungrateful little, I have inheritance business, Harry said, and put one of the letters on the kitchen table. He picked the Potter one, because it was the most normal looking. Vernon picked it up with the expression of a man handling something he suspects might bite, and read it, and the purple faded out of his face very quickly, replaced by something considerably closer to white. Petunia made a sharp little sound. This is, Vernon started. Real, Harry said. Yes. We don't want any of your kinds, I'm not asking what you want. Harry said it quietly, the way you say something when you're very sure of it. I'm telling you I'm going to London. If you lock the door, I'll find another way out. If you take my key, I'll manage without one. He paused. We both know strange things happen around me when I'm upset. The kitchen was very still. Outside, a bird sang. Vernon sat back down. Harry took the letter back, put his second-hand shoes on at the front door, walked down Privet Drive in the pale July morning, and caught the first bus into London with £2.50 and the absolute certainty that everything was about to change. He'd never been to Diagon Alley, but the letters had included a small card, cream-colored, heavy stock, with Gringotts Bank, established 1474, welcomes the Lord of 5 Houses printed on it in ink that shifted colors as he tilted it. On the back was a single word, leaky. He found the leaky cauldron the way, he suspected, magical things wanted to be found, by walking down Charing Cross Road with the card in his hand and letting something pull him sideways. The pub materialized between a bookshop and a record store as though it had always been there and he'd simply never been paying the right kind of attention. Inside it was dark and warm and smelled of ale and something smoky sweet. A handful of people sat at tables, some in robes, some in ordinary clothes. The barman was a cheerful-looking man with no hair and more chin than seemed strictly necessary. "Diagon Alley," Harry said, before the barman could speak. "I need to get to Gringotts." The barman glanced at him, and then glanced again, and then did the thing people kept almost doing but stopping themselves. He started to reach for his forehead and stopped. "Of course. Right through the back, young Harry," Harry said. "Just Harry." The barman smiled, a little startled. "Right through the back, Harry." The alley was extraordinary, and Harry allowed himself 30 seconds to be 11 years old and completely overwhelmed by it. The shops, the owls, the robes, the impossible smells, the sense of a whole world that had existed parallel to his for his entire life, and then he walked to the white marble bank at the end of the alley and went in. The goblins noticed him immediately. He wasn't sure what he'd expected. What he hadn't expected was for the tallest goblin at the nearest desk to look up from whatever he was examining, look at Harry with flat, clever, ancient eyes, and say, "Lord Potter Peveril. We've been waiting." Harry blinked. "How did you know? The wards on your account sang this morning at midnight," the goblin said, in a tone that suggested this was not a remarkable fact, merely an accurate one. "I am Ragnarok. I will handle your accounts personally. If you'll follow me." He followed Ragnarok through a door behind the main hall, down a corridor that felt older than the building around it, and into a meeting room that had clearly been designed for very important business. The chairs were carved stone. The table was dark wood with gold inlays. There was already parchment on it. 5 lordships and 1 living claimant, Ragnarok said, sitting across from him and folding his hands. "It hasn't happened since the Founder's era, and even then, it was not the same 5. You understand what you are holding?" "Not entirely," Harry said. "That's why I'm here." Ragnarok looked at him with something that might, in a goblin, have been approval. "Good. Lord Peveril, Lord Gryffindor, Lord Slytherin, each carries individual weight. But Lord Emery's supersedes them. The Emery seat is a Grand Lordship. In Wisengamot law, a Grand Lordship outranks Minister, Chief Warlock, and Headmaster simultaneously. It has its own veto powers that have not been used in 9 centuries because the seat has not been occupied." Harry let that sit for a moment. "What does that mean, practically?" "It means," Ragnarok said, "that there is no one in magical Britain with the legal authority to give you orders. Including Albus Dumbledore." Harry thought about the cupboard under the stairs. He thought about the letters hovering in the dark. He thought about Vernon's face going white at a single piece of parchment. "Show me the accounts," he said. It took 2 hours. The wealth was staggering, not just galleons, though there were more of those than Harry could sensibly imagine, but artifacts, properties, library collections, political seats, and what Ragnarok described as standing magical debts owed to the House of Potter by various parties who assumed the debts would never be called in. The Peveril vault contained the Elder Wand, or rather, it contained a sealed chamber where the Elder Wand should have been, with a notation that it was currently in the possession of Albus Dumbledore, claimed by right of dueling victory over Grindelwald. Harry noted this without expression. The Slytherin vault contained correspondence, centuries of it, and a sealed basilisk fang dagger that hummed when Harry touched the case, and a ring with a cracked black stone that made the goblin beside him make a small warning sound. "The stone is cursed," Ragnarok said. "Heavily. We recommend leaving it warded for now." Harry looked at the cracked black stone and felt something cold and purposeful looking back at him. "Agreed," he said, and moved on. The Gryffindor vault contained the sword, his sword. He felt it the moment he saw it, the way you feel your own heartbeat, silver with rubies, Godric Gryffindor engraved on the blade, and it lifted into his hand when he reached for it with the ease of something that had been waiting. That isn't supposed to be there, the goblin accompanying him said. That sword was mine, Harry said, and the sword said nothing, but it didn't need to. He shrunk it with a Gringotts reducing charm Ragnarok had taught him 30 minutes ago and slipped it into his pocket. The Emery's vault was last. It was also the only one that required Harry's own blood to open, a small cut on his palm, pressed to a stone door, and then a warmth like standing in full sunlight. Inside was older than anywhere Harry had ever been. The magic in that room was foundational, like the magic that holds mountains together. He didn't take anything from it. He just stood in the doorway and let it know him. It knew him back. When he emerged from Gringotts 2 hours and 20 minutes after entering, he had a money pouch with more galleons than he'd need for years, a ring on his right hand that Ragnarok had produced, the Potter family ring, resized, which bore the crest of all 5 houses worked into one seal, a leather satchel with copies of every relevant document, and the sword of Godric Gryffindor in his left jacket pocket, which should have been impossible given its actual size but apparently magical pockets. Worked differently. He also had a letter. Ragnarok had given it to him at the end, with an expression that was entirely neutral in a way that suggested it was being very deliberately neutral. This was held in trust, Ragnarok said, pending the activation of the Lordships. Your parents left it. It was a letter from his father. A letter from his mother. 2 separate pieces of parchment in 2 different handwritings, and he stood on the white steps of Gringotts in the morning sunshine with both of them and read them very carefully, and by the time he was done his eyes were bright and his jaw was set and he understood several things that he hadn't understood before. The most important one was this: his parents had known the risk. They hadn't hidden him to protect the Lordships. They'd activated the Lordship dormancy themselves, a deliberate choice, a sealed protection, so that if something happened to them the titles couldn't be stolen, couldn't be managed, couldn't be absorbed by guardians or political allies or well-meaning headmasters. They'd set the trigger at his 11th birthday because that was magical majority for inheritance purposes and because his mother, who had clearly been the more strategically minded of the two, had written, by 11 you'll be old enough to know your own mind, Harry, and young enough that they won't have entirely finished telling you who to be. That's the window. Use it. Harry folded both letters, put them in the innermost pocket of the satchel, and went to buy his school things. He had a list for that too. He spent the rest of the morning in Diagon Alley, and he did it differently than he would have if he hadn't spent 2 hours in Gringotts first. He didn't haggle. He didn't ask about prices. He walked into Madame Malkin's and was measured for robes, proper robes, good wool, not the kind that itched and frayed, and he added a second set in deep green and a third in silver because something in him that was new and warm and entirely unapologetic said why not, and he said out loud, why not, when Madame Malkin asked if he wanted the third set. And she smiled at him in a way that made him think she'd been in the business long enough to recognize someone who'd just come into themselves. He bought his books, all the ones on the list and then several more. He spent a very enjoyable 40 minutes in Flourish and Blots going through sections labeled Ancient Houses and Wisengamot Law and Foundational Magic and left with a second bag in the bookshop owner's best wishes. He bought his wand last. Ollivander's was quiet when he pushed the door open, and the wand maker emerged from the back with the look of a man who'd been expecting a particular customer for a very long time. I wondered when you'd come, Ollivander said, and his pale eyes fixed on Harry's forehead before dropping, slowly, to the ring on his right hand. Whatever he'd been about to say next died somewhere in his throat. His eyes went very wide. Mr. Ollivander, Harry said, I need a wand. Yes, Ollivander said, faintly. Yes, I imagine you need several things. He recovered quickly. He was a man who'd been dealing with extraordinary wands his entire life and had clearly developed a professional capacity to adapt. Let's see. Right hand. Right. He measured Harry with a tape measure that moved on its own. Then he started pulling boxes. The first 3 wands did nothing. The 4th sparked and fizzled. The 5th blew out a shelf of boxes. The 10th sent a crack racing up the wall that Ollivander fixed with the ease of long practice. The 20th, Holly, 11 inches, phoenix feather, sang. Not metaphorically. There was a sound, a single clear note, when Harry's hand closed around it, and all the warmth in his chest aligned with it the way compass needles align with north, and the wand threw a shower of gold sparks that lit up the entire shop, and Ollivander made a sound like a man watching something both wonderful and terrible arrive. "The phoenix whose tail feather is the core of your wand," Ollivander said, very quietly, "gave one other feather. One other. It is curious, very curious, that you should be destined for this wand, when its brother wand, well, its brother wand gave you that scar." Harry thought about that. "So the same phoenix gave a feather to my wand and a feather to Voldemort's." Ollivander flinched at the name, then steadied himself. Harry filed that away. "We must expect great things from you," Ollivander said. "Yes," Harry agreed pleasantly, paid for the wand, and left. He was back on Privet Drive by 4 in the afternoon, carrying bags and wearing a set of robes under his regular clothes because he'd decided he liked them and he didn't particularly care what the neighbors thought. The warmth in his chest had settled into something that felt permanent now, foundational, like it had always been there, and he just needed the right key to unlock it. Uncle Vernon met him at the door with the expression of a man who'd spent the day deciding how angry he was allowed to be. "Where have you been?" Vernon started. "London," Harry said. "I told you this morning." He stepped past his uncle and put his bags down in the hallway. "I'll need the second bedroom." The silence that followed was a specific kind of silence. Harry had lived in this house for 10 years and he knew all its silences the way you know the sounds of a place you've been forced to pay very close attention to. This one was the silence before an explosion. "You'll need the," Vernon started, going red. "Dudley has 2 rooms," Harry said, still in that same quiet, certain voice. "I've been sleeping in a cupboard since I was a year old. I'm going to Hogwarts in September. Before I leave, I'd like to sleep in a bed." He looked at his uncle steadily. "You're the legal guardian of the Lord Potter, Lord Peverell, Lord Gryffindor, Lord Slytherin, and Lord Emery's." "I'd look that up if I were you." "Lord Emery's specifically." He picked up his bags and walked up the stairs. Behind him, he heard Vernon make a strangled sound, and then heard him walk toward the kitchen table where he'd left the Gringotts documents Harry had also, very deliberately, left behind. He heard the rustle of parchment. He heard Vernon start reading. He walked to Dudley's second room, the one that was full of broken toys and old games and things Dudley had wanted and then lost interest in, pushed the door open, and started clearing space. By the time Aunt Petunia appeared in the doorway 10 minutes later, she was wearing the particular expression she reserved for things that were magic-adjacent and therefore made her furious and frightened in equal measure. "That room," she started. "I know," Harry said, without looking up from the shelf he was clearing. "I'll be in it until September. Then I'll be at Hogwarts." Then, after that, he turned and met her eyes for the first time and possibly ever with something other than wariness in his face. "I won't be coming back here." Petunia stared at him. Her mouth worked. In her eyes he could see, buried under years of petty cruelty and deliberate ignorance, something that might have been a version of her sister, something that recognized what it was looking at and was not entirely cold. "There are clean sheets," she said, finally, in the hall cupboard. It was the closest she'd ever come to an apology for anything. Harry considered that. "Thank you," he said. And meant it, a little. That night, in a real bed, with his bags stacked neatly against the wall and his new wand on the bedside table and the 5 lordship letters refolded inside his mother's book on advanced charms theory, the one from the Emery's vault that had his mother's handwriting in the margins, which he was going to read until he'd memorized every annotation, he lay on his back and thought about the months ahead. Hogwarts in September. The castle itself. 1/4 of which, legally, answered to him as Lord Gryffindor. Dumbledore, who had the Elder Wand, which was actually in the Peverell vault by rights, and who had clearly been making decisions about Harry's life since before Harry could walk. A school full of children who'd been told he was a legend, which was going to be deeply strange. Voldemort, somewhere, in some form, not as dead as everyone hoped. Sirius Black, his godfather, who was in Azkaban for a crime Harry already suspected, on the evidence of his father's letter and the shape of the story he'd been told, he hadn't actually committed. He had 3 months before term started. 3 months to learn everything he could. 3 months to become, as best he could, the person those 5 lordships had been waiting for. He opened his mother's book to the first annotated page. Her handwriting was small and precise and occasionally impatient, filling the margins with questions and corrections and, in one place, a small doodle of a phoenix that looked suspiciously like it was rolling its eyes. He smiled, in the dark, in the Real bed, in the room that was his for the summer. And started reading. He read for most of the summer. He was not, he discovered, a slow learner. He was actually quite a fast learner when no one was telling him to slow down for the class, or grading him on whether he made Dudley look bad, or docking points for the particular offense of knowing the answer. With no one watching, he worked through his first-year books in the first 3 weeks and then worked through the Gryffindor Lordship Library texts, which the Gringotts Fleur had delivered in a trunk, for the rest of July. He practiced his wand work in the garden in the evenings, when the neighbors had gone in for dinner. He was good at it immediately, which surprised him and then stopped surprising him. The warmth in his chest directed his magic the way breathing directs air. It wasn't effort. It was alignment. By mid-August he could cast every first-year spell cleanly, most second-year spells adequately, and he'd worked out, through 3 evenings of systematic experimentation in the garden, that his Parseltongue wasn't just the ability to speak to snakes. It was, according to the Slytherin texts, a fundamental aspect of magical persuasion. The ability to make living things understand you at a level below conscious thought. The garden snake he'd been chatting with since July confirmed this in its own limited way, by doing things he asked with a promptness that suggested it was less about language and more about the underlying intention. He wrote a letter to Gringotts about Sirius Black. He received a reply from Ragnarok that was precise and damning. Sirius Black had been imprisoned without trial. No veritaserum. No formal charges heard. Bartemius Crouch Sr. had signed the paperwork in the chaos after Voldemort's fall, and no one had thought to question it since. Harry wrote back, "Please research what legal mechanisms exist to request a trial. Also, who would need to petition?" The answer came back, "As Lord Emery's, you have the right to request a Wisengamot emergency session and compel testimony. This power has not been exercised in living memory. It would cause a significant disruption." Harry wrote, "Good." In the last week of August he received his Hogwarts letter, the actual official one, on cream parchment with a purple seal, and felt something snap into focus. He'd been reading about Hogwarts all summer, the founding, the castle's own magic, the way Gryffindor's lordship connected to the castle's structural enchantments. As the founder's heir, he had a relationship with 1/4 of the castle that the current administration did not have and could not replicate. He'd thought very carefully about what he was going to do with that. He'd thought very carefully about Dumbledore specifically. He had nothing against Albus Dumbledore as a person, precisely. The man was clearly brilliant and clearly had done genuinely important things. He also, clearly, had been managing Harry's life like a long-term strategy rather than treating him like a human being who deserved information about his own existence. Leaving a child, an infant, with the Dursleys. Suppressing the lordship documents. Holding the Elder Wand, which was a Peveril artifact that now legally belonged to the Lord of the House. Building an entire narrative of the Chosen One that was, at its core, a strategy for producing a particular kind of soldier. Harry didn't intend to be that soldier. He intended to be himself. He packed his trunk the night before the 1st of September with the economy of someone who'd spent 10 years making do with very little space. He laid his robes on top, the good ones from Madame Malkin's. He made sure the sword was accessible. He put the 5 letters in the inner breast pocket of the green traveling robe he was going to wear on the train and felt them there, warm and certain, like a second heartbeat. In the morning, he carried his trunk downstairs himself. Vernon was in the kitchen. He didn't say anything. He'd been saying significantly less since he'd read the Gringotts documents. Harry appreciated the quiet. Petunia stood at the kitchen counter, her back to the room, and as Harry passed the kitchen door she said, without turning, "Your mother liked the train." Harry stopped. "What?" "King's Cross. Platform 9 3/4. Your mother used to love the journey. She'd come back every summer talking about it." Petunia's shoulders were rigid, her voice stripped down to something almost neutral. "She liked the trolley. The pumpkin pasties." He was quiet for a moment. "I'll look out for them," he said. He walked out the front door of number 4 Privet Drive and didn't look back. The summer birds were singing. The morning was clear. His trunk bumped along the pavement behind him, and the ring on his right hand caught the sunlight and threw tiny prisms across the garden wall. He was 11 years old. He was lord of 5 houses. He was going to school. He was, for the first time in his life, exactly where he was supposed to be, not because anyone had put him there, but because he'd chosen it himself. The morning felt like the first page of something very large. He was looking forward to the rest of it. Chapter 2, The Eviction. The Hogwarts Express left at 11 o'clock, which gave Harry exactly 47 minutes after arriving at King's Cross to figure out how platform 9 3/4 worked. He'd read about it in Hogwarts, a history, one of the books he'd picked up on his own initiative in Flourish and Blots, because the official first-year list had been notably short on anything useful, so he knew the mechanics. Walk at the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 with confidence and intention. Don't hesitate. Hesitation was the only thing that made it fail. He walked through on his first try without slowing down. The Scarlet steam engine was already there, hissing and impatient, and the platform was chaos in the best possible way, owls and cats and toads, families saying goodbye in ways that ranged from tearful to matter-of-fact, children dragging trunks that were clearly too heavy for them, and everywhere the particular excitement of people who were going somewhere that mattered. Harry loaded his trunk, found a compartment near the middle of the train, and settled in with his book, Wisengamot Procedure and Ancient Law, 3rd edition, which was not on any school list but which Ragnarok had recommended with something approaching enthusiasm, and watched the platform through the window. He'd been reading for about 10 minutes when the compartment door opened and a boy with a round face and an expression of sustained low-level anxiety stuck his head in. "Sorry, d'you mind? Everywhere else is full, or there are people in them who," he stopped. "Oh. Sorry." "Are you, sit down," Harry said, in a friendly way. "I don't bite." The boy came in, dragging a trunk that seemed to be fighting him, and deposited himself across from Harry with the relief of someone who'd been hoping for exactly this level of social pressure and no more. He had a toad in a box on his lap. The toad looked philosophically resigned to everything. "I'm Neville," the boy said. "Neville Longbottom. Harry Potter." Neville did the thing people did, the quick glance at the forehead, and then, to his credit, visibly stopped himself and met Harry's eyes instead. "Right. Hi. Sorry. Everyone keeps talking about you on the platform. I wasn't going to, but now that you've said it I felt weird not acknowledging. Sorry, I'm making this strange." "It's fine," Harry said, and found he actually meant it. Neville's particular brand of embarrassed honesty was considerably more appealing than the gaping he'd gotten from half the platform. "What's the toad's name?" Neville brightened fractionally. "Trevor. He escapes constantly. I've lost him 4 times since London Bridge." "Does he have a preference for anywhere in particular?" "Sometimes animals have a specific thing they're heading toward." Neville blinked. I don't know. He keeps going toward water, I think. There's probably a bathroom at the end of the carriage. If you put his box near the window he might stay put." Harry paused. "I've been talking to animals a lot this summer. They tend to want specific things and they get frustrated when no one figures it out." "You can talk to animals?" "Snakes, specifically. Other animals I can just sort of understand the shape of what they want. It's harder to explain than it sounds." Neville stared at him for a moment, then apparently decided this was perfectly reasonable and moved Trevor's box to the window seat. Trevor pressed his nose against the glass and looked slightly more content. "What are you reading?" Neville asked. Harry showed him the spine. Neville's eyebrows went up. "That's not a first-year book." "No. It's a Wisengamot book." "Yes." Neville looked at him with the tentative expression of someone working up to a question. "My gran's on the Wisengamot. Junior Undersecretary. She would absolutely love that you're reading that on the first day. She'd also want me to ask why." Harry considered whether to say it. Then decided there wasn't any good reason not to. Neville Longbottom, he'd looked up the name over the summer, because he was thorough, came from a family that had suffered significantly under Voldemort. His parents were in St. Mungo's. His grandmother was a strict, traditional woman with Wisengamot connections. If he was going to build the kind of alliances that 5 lordships made possible, he needed to start somewhere, and Neville's grandmother was exactly the sort of person he needed to know. More than that, though, Neville had good eyes. Honest eyes. Harry had learned to read people in the Dursley house, where reading people was a survival skill, and what he read in Neville was someone who'd been told, in various ways, that he wasn't quite enough. Harry recognized that from the inside. "I have 5 lordships," Harry said. "I activated them on my birthday. I'm trying to understand what I can do with them before term starts and everyone starts trying to tell me what I can't do." Neville was quiet for a full 3 seconds. Then, 5. 5. Which 5? Harry listed them. With each name, Neville's expression shifted, surprised, more surprised, stunned, and then, at Emery's, a kind of blankness that suggested his brain had briefly exceeded its processing capacity. "My gran," Neville said carefully, "is going to have an absolutely unprecedented reaction to you. Good or bad? I genuinely don't know." He paused. "Probably good. She respects old law. She's spent 20 years complaining that the old law gets ignored whenever it's convenient and enforced whenever someone powerful benefits." He was quiet again. "My parents were Aurors. They were tortured into, they're in St. Mungo's. The people who did it were tried. But other things weren't handled properly. She's angry about it." "I know," Harry said, quietly. "I've been reading." Neville looked at him steadily. "What are you going to do?" "Fix some things," Harry said. "Starting with the things that are most obviously broken." He went back to his book. "I'm going to need allies who understand that the old law is a tool, not a religion. People who care about what it was built to do, not just the tradition of it." Neville was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up the spare book Harry had in the bag beside him, A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration, because he did still have to pass his classes, and opened it without asking. Harry found that he didn't mind at all. They read in comfortable silence for an hour. The compartment gained 2 more occupants around noon. The first was a girl with a great deal of bushy brown hair and an expression of fierce organizational competence, who opened the door, looked at them, looked at Harry's Wisengamot book, and said, "That's not a first-year text." "No," Harry agreed. "I'm Hermione Granger. I've read all the first-year books and most of the secondary texts mentioned in the footnotes. I was looking for somewhere to sit where people might actually want to have a conversation." "Sit down," Harry said, in the same tone he'd used with Neville, and she did, and within 4 minutes she and Harry were in an animated argument about the 3rd edition versus 4th edition interpretations of the Wisengamot emergency petition clause, which was an argument Harry hadn't expected to have with anyone on this train and which he was genuinely enjoying. Hermione Granger argued the way good arguments should be argued, with evidence, with energy, and with the openness to being wrong when the evidence went against her. She was wrong about the petition clause, and she conceded it gracefully when Harry showed her the relevant passage, and then immediately found a different angle of disagreement, which he respected enormously. The 2nd edition was a girl who simply appeared, Harry wasn't sure when, exactly, because he'd been mid-argument with Hermione and when he looked up she was simply there in the corner seat, blonde and serene, with a magazine held upside down and an expression of peaceful attention. "Hello," Harry said. "Hello," she said. "You're very bright. All 5 of them lit up at the same time when you walked past my compartment, so I came to find you." Neville looked nervous. Hermione looked uncertain. Harry looked at her with genuine interest. "What lit up?" "The Lordship signatures," she said, as though this were obvious. "They pulse. Like bioluminescence, but magical. I've been seeing them since I was 4. She tilted her head. "I'm Luna Lovegood." Harry thought about that. "You see magical signatures?" "Among other things. Yours is very complicated. There are 5 distinct harmonics, but they're braiding together now. It started happening around your birthday, I expect." Harry felt the warmth in his chest pulse once, in a way that felt recognizing. "Can you see other things? About people, or about situations?" "Sometimes," Luna said serenely. "It's more like weather forecasting than prophecy. I can see which way the winds are blowing." "That's useful," Harry said immediately. Luna smiled. It was a smile that had apparently surprised her slightly. He got the impression not many people responded to her observations with "that's useful" rather than "that's strange." He filed away everything about Luna Lovegood as important for later consideration and went back to his argument with Hermione, which had moved on to the question of whether the Slytherin lordship seat in the Wizengamot had been genuinely vacant or artificially suppressed. "Suppressed," Harry said. "Deliberately. There are 2 other seats in the same situation. Someone has been managing the Wizengamot's composition to prevent certain votes from going certain ways." "Who?" Hermione asked. "Working on it," Harry said. The train rolled on through the English countryside, and the 4 of them, Harry, Hermione, Neville, Luna, talked, and argued, and shared the contents of the trolley when it came. He had a pumpkin pasty and thought briefly of Petunia, who he thought he might never fully understand but who had known about the trolley and had told him, and by the time the sky outside the windows was going dark, Harry had a study group, 2 genuine friends, and 1 person who might be something more interesting than either. The boats were Hermione's favorite part. Harry could tell by the way she went quiet and just looked, which was, he'd already noticed, what she did when she was too moved to analyze. The castle rose out of the dark above the lake and it was extraordinary. Harry had read about it all summer, had looked at diagrams and historical illustrations and architectural analyses, and none of it had prepared him for the feeling of seeing it. The castle had presence the way living things have presence. It knew he was there. He felt the Gryffindor quarter of its magic orient toward him the way a sunflower orients toward light, and he felt his own magic answer it, and for a moment it was dizzying. Then Neville's boat listed sideways, Trevor made a bid for freedom, and Harry caught the toad one-handed and the moment passed, and they were just a boatload of first-years coming to school, which was also wonderful in its own right. The castle was vast and cold and magnificent up close. They were shepherded inside by a tall, stern woman with a sharp face and a pointed hat, Professor McGonagall, Hermione whispered, Transfiguration teacher and deputy headmistress, who looked at them with the measured assessment of someone who had been evaluating first-year students for decades and had developed very specific opinions about what she was seeing. Her gaze paused on Harry longer than on anyone else. He met it steadily. Something shifted in her expression, not softening, exactly, but a very slight adjustment in whatever calculation she was running. "The sorting will begin shortly," she said. "Please wait here." She left. Around him, the other first-years muttered to each other. A boy with platinum hair and a set of expensive robes was holding court near the door, Draco Malfoy. Harry identified him from description, and from the particular way he was performing confidence in a room full of nervous people. It was a tell. Genuinely confident people didn't need to demonstrate it. Malfoy's gaze found Harry with the unerring radar of someone who'd been briefed extensively on what to look for. He crossed the entrance hall with 2 large friends at his back. "Harry Potter," Malfoy said, in a tone that was probably intended to be casual. "I'm Draco Malfoy." He extended his hand. Harry looked at the hand. Then at Draco. "I know," he said pleasantly. Your father supported Voldemort and then claimed he was under the Imperius curse. The entrance hall went very quiet. Someone made a sound like a small animal being startled. Malfoy's extended hand withdrew slowly. The easy performance dropped off his face. What was underneath it was harder to read. Not stupid, Harry noted. Draco Malfoy was not stupid. He was, in this moment, recalibrating rapidly. You don't know what you're talking about. Lucius Malfoy, Ministry Records, November 1981, Harry said, in the same pleasant voice. I've been reading a lot this summer. But I don't have any problem with you specifically, Draco. Your father's choices are your father's choices. He paused. What matters is what you do with them. He turned away. Behind him he could hear the silence of a room full of 11-year-olds who had just watched something happen that they didn't entirely have the context for but who understood, instinctively, that a shift had occurred. Neville was at his shoulder. That was either very brave or very stupid, he said quietly. My family crest includes a lion, Harry said. I've leaned into it. The corners of Neville's mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was getting there. The Sorting Hat, Harry had also read about. He'd thought about it over the summer, because the hat had complicated implications. It sorted students into houses. He was, technically, the lord of all 4 houses. He was curious what the hat would make of that. He found out when McGonagall put it on his head and it immediately said, in his ear and only his ear, oh. Oh, this is interesting. You're the one. I've been told that a lot lately, Harry thought back. For houses, the hat said. For lordships, for claims, and you're asking me to put you in one. The magic in you has allegiances to all of them. Slytherin's cunning, Ravenclaw's knowledge, Hufflepuff's loyalty, Gryffindor's nerve, you have them all. Even Gryffindor's nerve in particular, given that ring on your finger. I know, Harry thought. I'm not asking you to sort me by what fits. I'm asking you where I'll be most useful. The hat was quiet for a moment. Then, that's either the cleverest thing a student has said to me in 200 years, or the most dangerously ambitious. I can't decide which. They're not mutually exclusive. No, the hat agreed. They're not. Very well, Lord Gryffindor. You want to be useful. And the place you'll be most useful, to the people who need you most, and to the changes you have in mind, is where your founder's blood already has roots. It paused. Then it said, quietly, but you should know, the castle knows you. The moment I say the word, it will know you properly. The Gryffindor quarter will wake up. Be ready for what that means. Ready, Harry thought. The hat shouted, to the great hall, Gryffindor. And the Gryffindor table erupted, and Harry took the hat off, and he felt it, the castle shifted. Something deep in the stone, like tectonic plates settling after an earthquake. The Gryffindor quarter of Hogwarts had been dormant, under administrative management, for centuries, and in the space of one word it was awake, and it knew the lord of the house had come home. He walked to the Gryffindor table and sat down, and the warmth in his chest was singing, and the castle around him was humming back. Across the hall, at the high table, Albus Dumbledore was watching him with sharp blue eyes over half-moon spectacles, and Harry met his gaze, and neither of them looked away for a long moment. Then Dumbledore smiled, warm and grandfatherly and entirely opaque. Harry smiled back, equally opaque. The sorting continued. He waited until after the feast, after the first years had been shown to Gryffindor Tower by a prefect named Percy Weasley who had an organizational enthusiasm that bordered on the ceremonial, after the fat lady portrait had swung open and the common room had received them all and everyone had started exclaiming over the squashy armchairs and the fire and the general warmth of the place. He waited until most of the first years had gone up to the dormitories, and then he went back down the stairs and said, to the fat lady, I need to go out. Curfew's at 9, the fat lady said. Headmaster's rules. I know, Harry said. And the headmaster's authority over the Gryffindor quarter of this castle is temporarily superseded by the Gryffindor lordship. That's old law, section 47, clause 12. I've memorized it. Would you like me to recite it? The fat lady stared at him. Then she stared at his ring. Then she swung open without another word. He went through. He walked the corridors with more confidence than should have been possible for a first year who'd been in the castle for 6 hours. But the Gryffindor quarter wasn't 6 hours old to him, it had been in his blood his whole life, and it was guiding him now, a gentle pull like following a compass, through corridors that were his and past tapestries that nodded and suits of armor that straightened as he passed. He found the headmaster's office on the second try. The stone gargoyle outside it was asleep, or pretending to be. Harry laid his palm against the wall beside it, felt the Gryffindor magic in the stone, and said quietly, "Let me in." The gargoyle's eyes opened. There was a long pause, during which Harry could feel the castle doing something complex, comparing his magical signature against something very old in its foundations, cross-referencing it, finding the match. Then the gargoyle stepped aside and the spiral staircase appeared. He went up. He knocked on the office door. There was a pause, and then Dumbledore's voice said, "Come in." The office was extraordinary, the portraits of former headmasters and headmistresses, the silver instruments, the books, the general accumulated weight of decades of very powerful magic. The phoenix on its perch looked at Harry with burning amber eyes and made a soft sound that was not quite music and not quite fire. Dumbledore sat behind the desk, and he was looking at Harry with the attentiveness of a man who had been expecting this visit and had been uncertain exactly what form it would take. "Harry," he said warmly. "This is a surprise." "It's rather late I know it's late," Harry said. He sat down in the chair across from the desk without being invited to. "I'll be direct, since we're both busy people. I activated my lordships on my birthday. I spent the summer at Gringotts and in the lordship archives. I know about the suppression of the Potter estate documents, the dormancy wards you had placed on my Gringotts accounts, the Elder Wand, and the way the Wisingamot seats have been managed for the past 10 years. He paused. "I'm not here to be angry about it. I want to understand your reasoning." Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. The silver instruments continued their small movements. The phoenix watched. The portraits had gone still. "You are," Dumbledore said finally, "remarkably well-informed for an 11-year-old. "I'm a remarkably well-informed 11-year-old, Harry agreed. "What was the reasoning?" Dumbledore's hands folded on the desk. When he spoke, it was carefully, and Harry noted the carefulness, not deception, exactly, but the considered deployment of partial truth. "There is a prophecy, Harry. One that concerns you and Lord Voldemort. The specifics of it, and the weight of what it portends, are not things I wish to place on the shoulders of a child who hadn't yet had the chance to simply be a child. I grew up in a cupboard," Harry said. "The chance to simply be a child was the first thing that was taken from me. I'd have rather had the information." Dumbledore received that without flinching, which Harry gave him credit for. "You're right. In that specific respect, I made a wrong choice, and I will not insult you by arguing otherwise." "The Elder Wand," Harry said. A pause. "It came to me by right of combat. I defeated Grindelwald, in 1945. Since then, it has been in your possession, and the House of Peverell has been without its lord. Now the lord is here." Harry set a piece of parchment on the desk, the Gringotts document, with the vault notation and the legal claim. "I'm not demanding it immediately. I'm informing you that I'm aware of the situation and that we'll need to resolve it properly." Dumbledore looked at the parchment. Then he looked at Harry, and there was something in his expression, not quite calculation and not quite respect, but something that lived in the neighborhood of both. "You came here tonight not to confront me, but to establish what the situation is." "Yes," Harry said. "Because if we're going to have a relationship that works, and I think we need to, because you know things I need to know and I have resources you need access to, then it needs to be honest. I'm not interested in being managed. I'm interested in being trusted with the actual facts and making my own decisions with them. Dumbledore was quiet for a longer moment this time. And if I feel, in my considerable experience, that some information is too dangerous to share with someone your age? Then tell me that directly, Harry said, and tell me what you'd need to see from me to change that assessment. Don't make the decision invisibly and call it protection. He met the old man's eyes. I've been invisible my whole life. I'm done with it. The office was still. The portraits were listening, he could feel them listening, the former headmasters and mistresses of a school that had been managing children and their futures for 1,000 years. You have, Dumbledore said, slowly, your mother's directness. I'll take that, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him across the desk for a long time. He was reassessing, Harry could tell, the whole model of Harry Potter that he'd built and relied on, the manageable grief-struck child he'd expected, was being revised against the reality of a boy who'd spent a summer doing his homework in the most thorough sense of the phrase. Then he said, the headmaster's office has, traditionally, final authority over Hogwarts Castle. Over 3/4 of it, Harry said. The Gryffindor quarter answers to the Gryffindor Lordship. I've confirmed this with the castle itself. Not the administration, the castle's foundational enchantments. He said it without heat. That's not me taking something from you. That's just how it was set up by the founders, and it was never changed because no one was here to invoke it. Dumbledore's expression was unreadable. And what do you intend to do with that authority? Make sure Gryffindor students are treated fairly. Make sure the parts of the castle that answer to my lordship are maintained properly. Have access to certain records that are in the Gryffindor Administrative Archive, which I've confirmed exist in the lower library. Harry paused. And remove the suppression wards that were placed on several sections of the castle library. Someone put blocks on books that deal with lordship law and ancient house rights. I'd like those removed. The books were blocked to prevent dangerous knowledge, the books were blocked to prevent students from knowing their own rights, Harry said, pleasantly but precisely. There's a difference. Another long silence. The phoenix stood up on its perch, spread its wings briefly, and made the sound again, the one between music and fire. It looked at Harry. Then it looked at Dumbledore. Then it settled back, and Harry could have sworn it was waiting to see what happened. Very well, Dumbledore said at last. The suppression wards will be removed. Regarding the other matters, we'll have ongoing conversations, Harry said. He stood up. I'm not here to dismantle everything you've built. I'm here to ensure that what you've built doesn't come at the expense of the people it's supposed to protect. Including me. He paused. Especially me. He was at the door when Dumbledore said, quietly, the headmaster's position. Harry turned. You have the legal authority, Dumbledore said, and his voice was level but his eyes were not. The Gryffindor Lordship, combined with the Emrys Grand Lordship, gives you the power to remove the headmaster from his administrative role. I imagine you've researched this. Yes, Harry said. And? Harry looked at him for a moment. You're the best defensive magical mind in Britain. You know things about Voldemort that I need. You have experience running a school that I don't. He paused. But you've been running it like it's yours. It isn't. It belongs to 4 founders, and right now, I represent one of them. He let that settle. I'm not removing you from the headmaster's office. I'm removing your unilateral authority over the Gryffindor quarter and the library suppression wards. And I'm telling you, clearly, that I am not your chess piece. He opened the door. I think, Dumbledore said from behind him, in a voice that was very quiet and not entirely steady, that Godric Gryffindor would have found you remarkable. Harry paused on the threshold. I know, he said. His sword chose me. He went back down the spiral staircase and through the corridor and up to Gryffindor Tower, and when he told the fat lady the password and she swung open and he climbed through into the warm common room, he found it empty except for Hermione Granger, who was sitting in the chair closest to the fire with a Transfiguration textbook and the look of someone who had been waiting. "Where did you go?" she asked. He told her. She stared at him. Then she looked at the fire for a moment. Then she said, carefully, "You didn't remove him. Not his role. Just the parts that weren't his to have." That's strategically sound," she said, and he could tell she was also working out the ethics of it and would probably come back to him with a follow-up argument about it in the morning, which he was already looking forward to. He'll be on alert now. Yes. He'll try to manage you through different channels. Yes. She thought about that. You're going to need to stay ahead of him. That's what you're for, Harry said, and she looked startled and then oddly pleased. I'm serious, Hermione. You're faster at processing information than almost anyone I've met. I need someone who pushes back when I'm wrong. I'm going to be wrong sometimes. Obviously, she said, which was also exactly right. He sat down in the other chair by the fire and looked at the flames. The castle's awake, he said. The Gryffindor quarter. I can feel it now, like an extra sense, just at the edge. Like peripheral vision, but for stone and enchantments. What does it feel like? He thought about how to say it. Like having a house for the first time. Hermione Granger looked at him across the firelight, and she was perceptive enough not to say anything, and kind enough to let the silence stand. They sat by the fire for another hour before she announced that they needed to sleep because their first class was Transfiguration at 9 and she intended to be prepared. He agreed, and they went to their respective dormitories, and Harry lay in his four-poster bed listening to the castle breathe around him, the Gryffindor quarter alive and attentive and thought about the look on Dumbledore's face when he'd said, "I am not your chess piece." Not anger. Not even entirely surprise. Something that was, underneath everything else, a species of relief. As though part of Albus Dumbledore, the part that had been a young man once, brilliant and impulsive and wrong about important things in ways he'd spent decades trying to correct, had been waiting for someone to finally push back. Harry closed his eyes. The castle hummed around him. Outside, the Scottish mountains were dark and cold and enormous, and somewhere beneath them, in a chamber he would deal with in time, something old and dangerous slept. But not tonight. Tonight the Gryffindor Lord had come home, and the house had answered, and that was enough. Chapter 3, The Old Laws. The first week of classes established several things quickly. Harry was good at magic. Not just good in the way that some students had a natural aptitude, but good in the way that suggested his magic had been waiting its entire life for someone to point it in a direction and let it go. Spells that took other students 3 classes to master he was doing cleanly by the second attempt. Charms class with the cheerful Professor Flitwick turned into an extended demonstration when Harry's Wingardium Leviosa not only levitated the feather but held it stable in the air without visible concentration while he had a conversation with Neville about the wrist movement. Flitwick had made a small sound of pure academic delight and written something in his notebook. Transfiguration with McGonagall was more interesting because McGonagall herself was more interesting. She was rigorous and precise and didn't waste words, and Harry appreciated all 3 qualities. She turned her desk into a pig and back in the first 30 seconds and then surveyed the room with the expectation of someone who knew exactly what she was going to get. What she got was Harry turning his match into a needle on the first try, cleanly metallic and sharp-pointed and exactly right, while Hermione on one side of him was on her 3rd attempt and Neville on the other was on his first and squinting at it with fierce concentration. McGonagall picked up his needle, examined it, set it down, and looked at him for a long moment. "Adequate," she said. He kept his face neutral. She kept hers neutral. They both knew it was considerably better than adequate. He appreciated that she didn't make a scene about it. Potions was Snape, who wore black and had greasy hair and an academic hatred of Harry that was visible from the first moment, when he called out, "Potter," from the register with a particular intonation that conveyed an entire pre-written biography of incompetence and fame-seeking. Harry looked at him across the dungeon and thought, calmly, about what he knew: Severus Snape, Death Eater, turned informant, Dumbledore's spy, driven by grief over Harry's dead mother and a guilt complex that had curdled into cruelty toward the nearest available target. "Yes, Professor," Harry said, with complete neutrality. Snape asked him questions designed to humiliate, the questions, Harry reflected, of a man who expected a celebrity dunce. He answered them all. Not showing off, just answering, directly and correctly, because he'd read the books and the books had the answers. Snape's expression when Harry correctly described the properties of Bezoar, Monkshood, and Wolfsbane in 3 sentences each was not pleasant. It was the expression of a man who had prepared a particular kind of encounter and found the other party had read the script in advance. He didn't pursue Harry after that. He moved on to making Neville's life difficult instead, and Harry filed that away for later addressing in a way that would not involve a public confrontation in the first week of term. The thing that occupied most of his non-class attention in the first week was the castle itself. The Gryffindor quarters awareness was exactly what he described to Hermione, a peripheral sense, a constant low hum of information at the edge of consciousness. He knew when doors in his quarter opened and closed. He knew when the moving staircases in his section shifted. He could feel the overall structural health of the stonework the way you feel your own joints, not constantly intrusive but present when he checked. And he was finding, as the days passed, that he could extend his awareness further than just the Gryffindor quarter if he pushed, like stretching a muscle that hadn't been used in a long time. On Thursday evening he was sitting in the library with Hermione and Neville. They'd been meeting every evening since the second day, pulled together by shared academic ambition and by the fact that Hermione had decided Harry's research needed organizational support and was providing it whether he'd asked for it or not, when he felt something shift in the castle's deep foundations. Not in his quarter. Deeper than that. In the part of the castle that predated the house divisions, in the oldest stone at the very bottom of the building. Something old and alive and enormous had turned over in its sleep. "Harry," Neville said, "you've gone very still." "There's something under the castle," Harry said. Hermione looked up from her notes. "The dungeons?" "Lower than the dungeons. Lower than the foundations." He paused, extending the sense further, and the shape of it, vast and cold and serpentine, pressed back at him. He drew back quickly. Not frightened, but cautious. Something that large and old required respect. "It's dormant. And it knows I'm here." They were quiet. "Do you know what it is?" Neville asked. Harry thought about the Slytherin vault. The basilisk fang dagger that had hummed. The Parseltongue connection. "I have a strong suspicion," he said. "I'll deal with it when the time comes. It's not immediately dangerous." Hermione looked like she had 17 questions. He appreciated that she organized them into a look rather than releasing them all at once. "The more pressing thing," Harry said, pulling his focus back to the papers on the table, "is the Wizengamot letter." He'd sent it on the Tuesday of the first week. 6 pages of close-written text on Emery's crested parchment, cream and pale blue with the coiled dragon seal, which Ragnarok had shown him how to produce with a press of his ring to the wax. 6 pages addressing 3 things: the formal notification of the Emery's Lordships' reactivation and his claim to the seat, the formal request for a review of the imprisonment of Sirius Black, and a shorter section requesting official acknowledgement of the other 4 lordship claims. He'd sent it through Gringotts rather than the school Ollery, because Gringotts had their own post-service for legal matters and because the school Ollery was almost certainly monitored. Ragnarok had written back on Wednesday, "Your letter was received. The ministry is currently deciding how alarmed to be." Harry had written back, "They should be moderately alarmed. Enough to pay attention. Not enough to do something panicked. Please let me know if they move toward panicked." The response, "Understood. Cornelius Fudge has read your letter 3 times. He is currently at the moderate alarm stage." On Friday morning, the reply from the Wizengamot clerk's office arrived. It was addressed to Lord Emery's in handwriting that suggested the clerk had found this deeply unusual, and it acknowledged his claim with the formal language of ancient law, which meant they couldn't simply ignore it or file it away. The Emery's claim required formal response because the Emery's lordship was a grand lordship and grand lordship procedure was codified in the founding charter. Regarding Sirius Black, the letter said, with the elaborate circumlocution of people who were very uncomfortable with what they were saying, the request for review has been forwarded to the relevant department. What does "forwarded to the relevant department" mean? Neville asked, reading over Harry's shoulder. It means they're hoping it goes away, Harry said. He turned the letter over, wrote on the back, "The relevant department has 4 weeks to respond. After 4 weeks, I will exercise my right under Ancient Law Section 91 to call an emergency Wisengamot session directly. I look forward to your response," folded it, and sent it back with the returning Gringotts post owl. Hermione watched this process with the expression of someone watching a chess player make a move several steps ahead of anything she'd anticipated. "You're moving very fast," she said. "Sirius Black has been in Azkaban for 10 years without a trial," Harry said. "How fast would you want someone to move if it was your family?" She looked at him. Then she looked at the returned letter. Then she went back to her notes with the particular focus she deployed when she was thinking about something she didn't have an answer to yet. He addressed the Snape situation on Friday afternoon. Not confrontationally. He'd thought carefully about what the right approach was, and confrontation wasn't it. Snape was a man who had been operating on a specific set of assumptions about Harry Potter for years, and those assumptions were wrong, and the most efficient way to correct them was not argument but evidence. After potions, during which Neville's potion had been sabotaged by Draco Malfoy, who had knocked Neville's elbow at the exact moment he was adding porcupine quills, resulting in an eruption of silver-grey smoke that had taken half the class with boils, Harry stayed behind while everyone else filed out. He hadn't said anything during the incident. He'd noted it, catalogued it, and made a decision. "Professor," he said, when the dungeon was empty except for the two of them. Snape looked at him with the minimal tolerance of a man who'd had a trying afternoon. "Potter. If you're here to complain about, I'm here to talk about Neville Longbottom," Harry said. "His potion was deliberately sabotaged. Malfoy knocked his elbow. I was sitting 2 benches back and I saw it clearly. So did Hermione Granger, who is considerably more credible as a witness than I am, if you'd prefer her testimony." A pause. "Are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm reporting what I observed, as the student code requires. I'd also note," Harry kept his voice even, "that Neville is in a difficult enough situation without his academic record being undermined by another student's interference. His grade for today should reflect that." Snape looked at him with an expression that was working through several stages. "You are remarkably concerned with Longbottom's welfare for someone who has known him less than a week." "He's my friend," Harry said simply. "I take care of my friends." Another pause. Snape, Harry knew, had been Lily Evans' friend once, a long time ago, before everything had gone wrong between them. He wondered if any of that was in Snape's head right now, looking at his mother's eyes in his father's face. He didn't say it. That was a private grief and it wasn't his to use. "I will review the incident," Snape said, finally, in the tone of someone agreeing to something under mild protest. "Is there anything else?" "No, sir," Harry said, and left. He didn't expect miracles. He didn't expect Snape to suddenly become generous toward Neville or anyone else. What he expected was that Snape, who was not stupid, had now been put on notice that Harry was watching and would report what he saw, and that created a different dynamic. Small change. But small changes compounded. Hermione, when he told her, said, "He won't thank you for it." "I'm not doing it for thanks," Harry said. "I'm doing it because Neville deserves to learn properly." Neville, when he found out, because Harry told him, because he didn't believe in doing things for people without telling them, was quiet for a long moment and then said, "Nobody's ever done that before. Pushed back on Snape about me." "Get used to it," Harry said. Neville looked at him with something that was doing its best to become solid self-possession and wasn't there yet but was clearly on its way. The second week brought flying lessons, which Harry had been thinking about since he read about Quidditch in August. The brooms were school brooms and the school brooms were battered and reluctant, but Harry's came up on the first call, which caused the flying instructor, a woman named Madame Hooch with yellow hawk-like eyes, to glance at him with interest. He took off before she'd finished the instruction sequence, not recklessly but smoothly, leveling off at 30 feet and hovering while he calibrated the feel of it. The broom was old and listed slightly left, and he corrected for it, and then he went up another 20 feet just to feel the wind and the height and the extraordinary plainness of the sky. Below him, Neville lost control of his broom. It happened fast, the broom bucked, Neville's grip slipped, and he was suddenly ascending at speed with an expression of absolute horror, and Harry was moving before he'd consciously decided to. He pushed the broom into a steep dive that the school broom absolutely wasn't designed for, felt it shuddering under him, got below Neville's trajectory, and caught Neville's robe at the shoulder with one hand and his arm with the other, and between them they slowed and descended in a controlled spiral that was extremely ungainly but resulted in both of them landing upright on the grass. "Oh," Neville said. "Oh, thank you. Oh, that was, you all right?" "I think so. My wrist is," he looked at his right wrist, which was bent at an angle that wrists didn't naturally achieve. "Oh. That's not right." Madame Hooch was there immediately, professional and efficient. She took one look at Neville's wrist and said hospital wing, and she looked at Harry with something that had moved past interest to outright assessment. "That was extraordinary flying," she said, low enough that only he could hear. "That broom is 30 years old and you handled it like it was new." "I've been reading about technique," Harry said. "Reading," she said. "Yes." She looked at him for another moment, and then at the broom, and then at the distant figure of Neville being supported toward the castle. "Report to me on Saturday morning," she said. 7 a.m. "Don't mention it to the other students." He agreed. He found out on Saturday morning that Madame Hooch had played professional Quidditch for the Montrose Magpies for 6 seasons before moving into instruction, and that she had very specific things she wanted to find out about Harry's flying capability. He spent 2 hours on a school firebolt she produced from a locked cabinet, and by the end of it her face had done the same thing Flitwick's had in Charms, that particular expression of academic delight that comes from watching something work exactly as it should. She told him she was recommending him to Professor McGonagall for the Gryffindor Quidditch team. She said first-year students weren't normally eligible, but there was a clause in the rules for exceptional ability. He thanked her and meant it. He didn't tell anyone except Hermione and Neville, because they were the people he told things. The letter from the ministry arrived on a Wednesday in the 3rd week. It came through the Gringotts owl, which landed on the Gryffindor table at breakfast and attracted attention because it was a very large black owl with Gringotts livery and a sealed envelope that was clearly not school correspondence. Several people stared. Harry opened it without haste. It was from the office of the Minister for Magic, and it was signed by Cornelius Fudge, and it was trying very hard to be both important and soothing simultaneously, which was a combination that produced something closer to anxiety-inducing. It acknowledged his lordship claims with formal language that stopped just short of enthusiasm. It said, regarding the matter of Sirius Black, that the Department of Magical Law Enforcement was reviewing the case and would provide a response within the statutory period. It also said, in the second-to-last paragraph, that the minister would be pleased to arrange an informal meeting at Harry's earliest convenience, at a location of his choosing, to discuss and here the letter used 3 different circumlocutions for alarming implications of your situation before settling on, the significant historical significance of the reactivated lordships. Harry put the letter down and looked at Hermione. "Fudge wants a meeting." "Of course he does," Hermione said. "You have 5 votes in the Wisengamot and veto powers that override the minister's office. He's terrified." "He should be mildly concerned," Harry said, which was almost exactly what he'd told Ragnarok. "Not terrified. I don't want him making bad decisions out of panic." "Then you need to meet with him soon," Hermione said. "Before the panic has time to compound." He wrote back on Gringotts parchment that day, "Dear Minister Fudge, I am available for a meeting on Saturday the 19th, at Gringotts, in the formal meeting room. Please bring relevant Department of Magical Law Enforcement files on Sirius Black. I look forward to discussing these matters with you. Lord Harry J. Potter Peveril Gryffindor Slytherin Emrys." The title took up a full line and he suspected that was doing some work on its own. You can't go to London on a Saturday, Neville said, on Wednesday evening, when Harry explained. They were in the common room after dinner, the three of them and Luna, who had started appearing at their study sessions without announcement and who was uniformly accepted because she was consistently useful and consistently strange, and neither of those things were problems. You'll have to get permission. From whom? Harry asked. McGonagall. Dumbledore. School rules. The Emery's lordship exempts me from school travel restrictions, Harry said. Section 12 of the Hogwarts Charter, which Dumbledore confirmed was the foundational document during our conversation last week. I'm not above school rules in general. I just have specific exemptions written into the original charter that were never removed because no one was here to use them. Does Dumbledore know you're using them? Hermione asked. I'm going to tell him, Harry said. I'm not going to ask him. There's a difference. He went to Dumbledore's office that evening, sat through the door. He didn't go up. This was a notification, not a conversation, that he would be traveling to Gringotts on Saturday for a meeting with Minister Fudge, and that he would be back by dinner. He heard the pause from behind the door. Then, thank you for telling me, Harry. Then, after a beat, be careful. Always, Harry said, and went back to Gryffindor Tower. Luna, when he returned, was reading the Quibbler and said, without looking up, the meeting with the minister will go well, but not in the way the minister hopes. How do you mean? Harry asked. He'll come to the meeting thinking he's going to manage you, she said. He'll leave thinking you've managed him. But the difference is that you'll actually be right and he'll actually have agreed to something important. Harry looked at her for a moment. Are you seeing something specific, or is this weather forecasting? More of a breeze, Luna said. But it's a consistent one. Cornelius Fudge arrived at Gringotts on Saturday morning in lime green robes and a bowler hat, accompanied by a tight-lipped woman in ministry red who was introduced as Dolores Umbridge, senior undersecretary. Fudge was a round, worried-looking man with the kind of face that had been designed for reassurance and was currently failing at it. Umbridge was shorter, broader, and wore a fixed smile that Harry assessed, in approximately 15 seconds, as one of the most dangerous social masks he'd ever seen. Ragnarok had provided the formal meeting room, the same dark wood table, the gold inlays, the chairs carved from stone. Harry was already seated when they came in. He had Hermione's notes in front of him, organized into 3 sections. He'd brought nothing else except the Potter Emery's ring on his right hand and the particular quality of stillness that was his when he was very focused. Lord Emery's, Fudge said, reaching across the table to shake hands, and then stopping when he registered that Harry was 11 years old and apparently completely comfortable in this room, which was not what he'd prepared for. I expected, that is, we haven't met before, Harry said. Please sit down, Minister. They sat down. Umbridge was writing something on a clipboard. Harry looked at her once, measured her completely, and returned his attention to Fudge. He would deal with Umbridge eventually, but Fudge was the immediate problem. The Lordship claims, Fudge began, pulling papers from his briefcase with the efficiency of a man who'd prepared talking points. Remarkable, of course. Unprecedented in modern times. The Ministry is fully prepared to acknowledge the files, Harry said. Sirius Black. Fudge blinked. I was going to get to, I'd prefer to start there, Harry said pleasantly. The political acknowledgements are formalities and the paperwork is largely done. Sirius Black has been in Azkaban for 10 years and I want to understand why. Fudge exchanged a glance with Umbridge. Umbridge's smile didn't waver, but something behind her eyes shifted, recalibrated. Harry filed this away. Umbridge was the one whose reactions he needed to watch more carefully than Fudge's. Sirius Black was convicted of, Fudge started. He was imprisoned without trial, Harry said. I have the records. Bartemius Crouch Sr. processed the paperwork in November 1981 under emergency powers provisions. There was no formal hearing. No testimony. No veritaserum examination. He let that sit for a moment. He's my godfather. James Potter's best friend. And the legal case against him consists of paperwork signed by a man who subsequently lost his own mind and his own son to Voldemort's service, which suggests his judgment in that period may not have been at its most reliable. The room was quiet. The Ministry, Umbridge said, in a voice like cream with something sharp dissolved in it, operated under considerable pressure in those days. Emergency provisions exist precisely for what? Harry asked, turning to her. For bypassing due process entirely? For imprisoning someone for 10 years based on no formal evidence? He kept his voice measured. I'm not here to assign blame. I'm here to understand what happened so we can correct it. The question of what actually occurred on the night of October 31st, 1981, who betrayed my parents, who actually committed the crime Sirius Black was imprisoned for, has significant implications. For my family's history and for justice generally. Fudge was sweating. Umbridge's pen had stopped moving. An emergency Wisengamot session, Harry said, producing the relevant parchment from his folder, called under the Emery's Grand Lordship, to review the imprisonment of Sirius Black. This requires a formal response within 30 days. I'm filing it today. He slid it across the table to Ragnarok, who was sitting in the corner and had not spoken once but whose presence was its own kind of authority. Ragnarok will witness and register it. Fudge picked up the parchment. His face went through several colors. Now, there are proper channels, this is a proper channel, Harry said. The most proper channel that exists, actually, given that it's codified in the founding charter of magical Britain's legal system. He paused. If the Ministry cooperates and the DMLE reviews the case in good faith, the emergency session becomes unnecessary and we resolve this quietly. If the DMLE doesn't act within 30 days, we go to the full Wisengamot. He met Fudge's eyes. I don't want to embarrass anyone, Minister. I want my godfather reviewed fairly. That's all. Another long silence. Outside the meeting room, Gringotts moved around them, carts, vaults, the distant sound of ancient machinery, and none of it paid the least attention to the Minister of Magic's discomfort. I can speak to Amelia Bones at DMLE, Fudge said finally, in the tone of a man who has decided that agreeing is simpler than arguing. She's thorough. If there's been an injustice, there has, Harry said. Then she'll find it, Fudge finished, with the expression of someone who hadn't intended to commit to that much and had done it anyway. Thank you, Minister, Harry said, and meant it. He picked up the second piece of parchment. Now, the Wisengamot seats. They were there for 2 hours and 15 minutes. By the end of it, Fudge had agreed to 3 things he hadn't anticipated agreeing to: the formal DMLE review of Sirius Black's imprisonment, a temporary freeze on all Wisengamot votes pending formal acknowledgement of Harry's 5 seats, and a commitment to review the estate documentation for the properties held under protective ministry management, following the deaths of James and Lily Potter, several of which, Harry had discovered, had been quietly generating administrative fees for ministry officials who had been managing them for a decade. Umbridge had not agreed to anything because she had no formal role in the meeting, but she had written several pages of very small, very neat notes, and Harry watched the shape of her reaction carefully enough to conclude, she understood what had just happened better than Fudge did, she did not like it, and she was going to be significantly more difficult than the minister himself. He'd have to deal with that eventually. Not today. You're 11, Fudge said, at the door, with the air of a man who kept returning to this fact hoping it would eventually make things simpler. Yes, Harry agreed. How are you? Where did you learn? I read, Harry said. And I had a very good summer. He shook the minister's hand, nodded to Umbridge with the precise amount of courtesy that acknowledged her presence without conceding anything, and watched them leave. Ragnarok appeared at his elbow. Well handled, the goblin said. The freeze on Wisengamot votes will cause a significant disruption. Several parties have been counting on those votes for upcoming legislation. Which parties? Harry asked. Ragnarok smiled with every tooth. I will prepare a list. He was back at Hogwarts before dinner. He'd missed lunch, so he went to the kitchens first. The castle directed him, helpfully, through a portrait corridor he wouldn't have found without the Gryffindor connection, and a house elf named Dobby produced a plate of sandwiches with such fervent enthusiasm that Harry spent several minutes making sure the elf was all right, which he manifestly wasn't, but which was a problem Harry would return to when he had more information. In the great hall at dinner, something was different. He noticed it as he sat down, a shift in the quality of attention being directed his way from the staff table. McGonagall was watching him with an expression that had evolved past assessment into something closer to watchful concern. Dumbledore was talking to Flitwick and not visibly watching Harry, but Harry felt the quality of not watching that was more aware than watching. Snape was reading something and pointedly not looking. Word had gotten around. He'd suspected it would. The ministry wasn't known for discretion, and somewhere between Fudge's office and the usual channels, the news that an 11-year-old had frozen the Wizengamot, filed for an emergency session, and requested a DMLE review would have reached people. The staff table would be processing it. Good, he thought. Let them. He sat down between Hermione and Neville and helped himself to roast chicken. How did it go? Hermione asked, under the general noise of the hall. Fudge agreed to the DMLE review and the vote freeze. Hermione's fork stopped moving. He agreed to, both. And the estate audit. She was quiet for a moment. He must have been very alarmed. Moderately alarmed, Harry said. As planned. Neville, who had been listening while appearing to focus on his potatoes, said quietly, My Gran wrote. She heard about the Wizengamot letter. What did she say? She said, Neville stopped and smiled, which was something he was doing more often, a fact Harry noted with satisfaction. She said, finally, someone with sense and the standing to do something with it. And then she said I should tell her everything. Tell her everything, Harry said. Neville looked at him. Really? Augusta Longbottom on our side is better than Augusta Longbottom watching from the outside. Tell her what I'm doing and why. If she has concerns, I want to hear them. If she has information, I need it. She knows a lot about the Wizengamot, Neville said. I know, Harry said. That's why I want her. Neville went back to his potatoes with the expression of someone who was quietly rearranging his understanding of how things worked. Harry watched him do it and felt something he recognized, after a moment, as pride. Not the kind that came from his own accomplishments but the kind that came from watching someone else discover they were more capable than they'd been told. Luna, from across the table, where she had apparently been there the whole time without anyone noticing she'd sat down, said, The tides are shifting. I can see the signature changes from here. Several people at the staff table are very bright and very agitated. Which ones? Harry asked. Luna considered. The one with the turbans the most. He's been lit up all day, like something's afraid inside him. It's two signatures, almost. Like two flames in one lamp. Harry looked at the staff table. Professor Quirrell sat at the end, as far from Harry as he could get, wearing his usual purple turban and his usual expression of mild anxiety. Harry had been peripherally aware of Quirrell all week. There was something odd about the man's magic, a flatness to it that didn't match the occasional flickers of something considerably darker. Two signatures. Like two flames in one lamp. He filed that away carefully, in the section of his mind he'd labeled Voldemort adjacent, do not ignore. Thank you, Luna, he said. She beamed at him with the contentment of someone who had finally found a place where thank you was the appropriate response to what she'd said. On the last day of September, something occurred in the Gryffindor common room that Harry had been both expecting and working to prevent, though not the same incident. A letter had arrived for Ron Weasley, one of the other first years, red-headed and loud and good-natured in the way of someone who'd grown up in a family that was simply fundamentally decent, from his mother. Harry had observed Ron for 3 weeks and concluded that he was brave and loyal and chronically underselling himself because he was the sixth sibling and had spent his whole life being compared to people who had already done things. He could have been a friend. The shape of it was there. But the letter came, and Ron read it, and his face did something complicated. and then he folded it and shoved it in his pocket, and Harry saw just enough of the words over his shoulder to catch, "Hear that Dumbledore and the Ministry are fighting about, what have you gotten yourself caught up in," and a tone throughout that was clearly more frightened than angry. He didn't address it directly. He went and sat near Ron and said, casually, "Your brothers are Fred and George, right? Second years?" Ron looked up. "Yeah. Why?" "They helped a first year find a bathroom on the second floor on Tuesday. It turned out to be a trick bathroom that rearranges itself. They managed to get everyone out before it got bad. I heard it from the painting of the three sailors." Ron stared at him. "You hear things from paintings?" "The castle talks, if you know how to listen," Harry said. "The point is, your brothers handled a weird situation quickly and didn't panic. That's usually a family thing." Ron's expression, which had been doing something defensive, settled. "They're all right," he said, in the tone of someone who actually thought they were quite good. "Mum just gets worried." "That's what mums are for," Harry said, and there was something in his voice that made Ron glance at him, the particular flatness that comes from saying something true that costs something to say. "Sorry," Ron said, after a moment. "Your parents, it's fine," Harry said. "I'd rather have a mum who was worried. The alternative is worse." They sat in companionable quiet for a bit, and when the twins, Fred and George, who were exactly as advertised, came down from the upper dorms arguing about something that had been transfigured into something else, they swept Ron up in the argument and Harry watched it and thought that he'd have to find a reason to trust Ron Weasley with something real, eventually, because that kind of loyalty deserved to be pointed at something worth being loyal to. Thursday night in the third week of October, Harry was in the restricted section of the library. Not sneaking, he didn't sneak, it wasn't his style, but holding a library access authorization he'd requested from the castle itself. The Gryffindor Lordship extended to certain administrative functions of the Gryffindor Quarter, which included the areas of the library that had been designated as founder resources in the original charter. The restricted section contained 17 books that were technically under Gryffindor Lordship classification, meaning the founder's heir had permanent access. He'd confirmed this with the library's own enchantments, which had responded to the ring by showing him a list of those 17 books and their locations. He'd been working through them in order of relevance. Tonight's book was the Compact of the Four, Original Charter and Governing Principles, which was the actual founding document of Hogwarts and was not available anywhere else because there was only one copy. He'd been reading it for 2 hours, cross-referencing with his Wisengamot law notes. He found what he was looking for on page 312. It was a clause regarding the administrative structure of the school in the event that all 4 founder lordships were simultaneously occupied. The clause was clear: in such an event, a founders' council superseded all other administrative authority, including the headmaster position. The headmaster remained in a management role for day-to-day operations, but all strategic decisions regarding the school, curriculum, access, policy, required the council's assent. He read it twice. Then he sat in the silence of the restricted section and worked out the implications carefully, because implications required care before you did anything with them. He didn't have all 4 founder lordships. He had Gryffindor and Slytherin. Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff were vacant. But the existence of the clause was important information, and the existence of the mechanism was something he was going to want to understand before someone else found it. More importantly, his Gryffindor authority was real, documented, and rooted in the founding charter, and he'd been using it carefully. But he hadn't yet used the fullest extent of it, the part he'd been thinking about since the second night of term when he'd stood in Dumbledore's office and drawn the boundary. Because Dumbledore was still running the school in ways that needed correction, and the conversation they'd had in week 1 had been honest and productive and had resulted in the suppression wards coming down, he'd verified this in the library, 2 days later, but there were still things happening that shouldn't be. The library's suppression wards were down. But the student records that had been used to track which students showed interest in lordship law and ancient rights, records he'd found referenced in the castle's administrative archive, in a section he'd accessed through the Gryffindor connection, were still active. Dumbledore was still monitoring which students showed inconvenient intellectual interests. He thought about what to do with this for a long time, in the restricted section, with the founding charter open in front of him. Then he went back to the Gryffindor quarter, found the administrative archive access through the castle's hidden corridor, and removed the monitoring charms himself. All of them. Cleanly, with the Gryffindor Lordship authority, without asking. He left a simple notice in the archive log, monitoring charms on student intellectual activity removed under Gryffindor Lordship authority, by direction of the Lord of the House. Reinstatement of same will be treated as a violation of the Founding Charter, Section 7, Clause 3, the rights of students to intellectual freedom within the castle's walls. He dated it, sealed it with his ring, and went to bed. The next morning, Dumbledore called him in for a conversation before breakfast. He went. Dumbledore was standing at the window of his office when Harry came up the stairs, looking out at the grounds in the early morning light. He didn't turn immediately. Harry sat down. "You removed my monitoring system," Dumbledore said. "Yes," Harry said. "It was in place to track which students were reading about their own rights," Harry said. "Which is exactly the kind of thing Section 7 protects against, and you know it." A pause. Dumbledore turned. His face was, for once, not the warm grandfatherly mask. It was the face of a man who was genuinely grappling with something. "There are students in this school who come from families with connections to, yes," Harry said. "And watching what they read doesn't change their families. It just tells you which ones are thinking for themselves, so you can decide whether they're dangerous." He met Dumbledore's eyes. "Which is exactly what Voldemort did. Watch and track and decide who was a threat." That landed. Harry watched it land, watched Dumbledore receive it, watched the wince that the old man didn't entirely suppress. "That," Dumbledore said, very quietly, "is not a fair comparison." "I know it isn't fully fair," Harry said. "You're not Voldemort. But the mechanism is similar, and mechanisms that look similar have similar effects on people, even when the intention is different." He paused. "I'm not trying to tell you you're wrong about everything. You're not. But you have to be able to see when you're doing something that contradicts what you say you believe." The office was silent. The phoenix on its perch was watching both of them with that unnerving amber attention. "You are," Dumbledore said finally, "very much your mother's son. In certain specific respects. So people keep telling me," Harry said. "I'm starting to wish I'd had the chance to verify it directly." And that, he hadn't entirely planned to say that, it had simply come out, that made Dumbledore close his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, something had shifted. Not broken. Not surrendered. But adjusted, the way a conversation shifts when both people have finally gotten to the real thing. "There are things I need to tell you," Dumbledore said. "About the prophecy. About Voldemort's continued presence." He paused. "I should have told you already." "Yes," Harry said. "But you can tell me now." He stayed for another hour. He learned about the prophecy, the one that had sent Voldemort after his family, the one that had been the axis around which his entire life had been arranged. Neither can live while the other survives. He sat with it carefully, turned it over, looked at all its facets. It was important. It was also, he thought, a shape, not a sentence. A prophecy described the possible, not the inevitable, and the possible depended entirely on what choices people made. He'd have to think about that for a long time. But he had time. "Quirrell," Harry said, when Dumbledore had finished. A pause. "Careful. What about him?" "2 magical signatures. Luna Lovegood can see them. The second one is darker and older and very afraid." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "I think you already know." Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. "I have suspicions." "I know," Harry said. "And I know you're managing that situation in your own way. I'm telling you that I know about it, so that whatever your plan is, you account for the possibility that I might do something about it first." He paused. "I prefer to coordinate." You'd, Dumbledore stopped. Start it again. You're 11. You said that last time, Harry said. It keeps being true and keeps not being the point. Dumbledore looked at him. For just a moment, the old man looked genuinely tired, not weak, not defeated, but tired in the way of someone who has been carrying a very heavy thing alone for a very long time. I will tell you my plan, Dumbledore said. And I would like to hear yours. That's all I've ever wanted, Harry said. Outside the window, the October morning was turning gold. Below them, students were beginning to cross the grounds to their early classes, cloaks pulled against the wind. The castle hummed around them, aware, alive, and attentive. Inside the headmaster's office, two people who were going to need each other, whatever else was true between them, began to actually talk. Chapter 4, The Slytherin Seat. October turned cold overnight, the way Scottish weather changes, not gradually but all at once, as if the season had been waiting for permission. Harry woke on a Monday to find frost on the inside of the dormitory windows and the Gryffindor quarter of the castle noticeably more active than usual, the stonework cycling through small warmth adjustments that he felt at the edge of his awareness like someone quietly tending a fire. He lay there for a moment, cataloguing the sensations the way he'd taught himself to over the summer. The Gryffindor quarter's awareness was the most familiar now, warm, leonine, immediate. The Peveril connection was something different, deeper, quieter, like a very still lake. The Potter magic was foundational, the baseline of everything. Slytherin was the one that still surprised him sometimes, cold and precise and serpentine, with a kind of intelligence that felt ancient in a way even Gryffindor didn't. And Emery's was the one he barely touched because when he did the world went very wide and very still and everything felt consequential in a way that was difficult to come back from quickly. He got up, dressed in his good robes, the ones from Madame Malkin's, dark green today because he felt like it, and went down to breakfast while the rest of Gryffindor Tower was still mostly asleep. The great hall was quiet. Hermione was already there, which surprised no one. Neville arrived 5 minutes later with Trevor in his breast pocket, the toad apparently having achieved some kind of resigned domesticity. Luna drifted in from the direction of the Ravenclaw table without comment and sat across from Harry with a copy of the Quibbler folded under her arm. Something's going to happen today, Luna said, helping herself to toast. Something happens every day, Harry said. Something interesting, she said. The castle's restless. It's been restless since about 2 in the morning. Did you feel it? He had, actually. Around 2 a.m. the Slytherin connection had pulsed once, sharp and pointed, like a signal. He'd catalogued it and gone back to sleep because middle-of-the-night emergencies could usually wait until morning without the world ending. I felt it, he said. It came from below, Luna said. Not the dungeons. Lower. I know what it is, Harry said. I'll deal with it today. Hermione looked up from her book. When you say deal with it, I mean I'm going to go and say hello, Harry said. She stared at him. Harry, if what's under this castle is what I think it is, and I've been cross-referencing the chamber descriptions in Hogwarts, a history against Salazar Slytherin's known architectural projects, then it is not something you say hello to. I can speak Parseltongue, he said. So could Voldemort, she pointed out. And yet here I am, Harry said. He paused. The thing below the castle isn't aggressive. I've felt it 3 times now. It's curious. Curious things respond to communication better than they respond to being ignored or being feared. He ate some eggs. I'm not going alone. And I'm not going unprepared. Hermione absorbed this. Then, when? After classes. Before dinner. He looked at Neville. You don't have to come. I'm coming, Neville said, with the particular firmness he was deploying more frequently, that solid steadiness that had been there all along and was only now remembering it had a right to stand up. Somebody needs to be sensible. I'll come, Luna said. The signatures will be interesting. Harry looked at the 3 of them, Hermione with her jaw set, Neville with his quiet resolution, Luna with her serene attention, and felt the warm certainty that had become the background music of his life since midnight on his birthday. "Right," he said. "Eat your breakfast. Class is first." Double charms in the morning, which was genuinely enjoyable because Flitwick was teaching the theory of directional charm amplification and Harry had read ahead far enough to have questions about the interaction between amplification fields and ambient magic density, which sent Flitwick into a 15-minute tangent of pure academic enthusiasm that the other students mostly tolerated with the patience of people who'd signed up for something simpler. Then history of magic with Professor Binns, who was a ghost and who lectured with the animation of someone who had died mid-sentence in 1842 and hadn't stopped talking since. Harry used the time to review his notes on Slytherin's architectural projects because Hermione's concern had been valid and he should be more prepared. He knew what was down there. He'd known since the Slytherin vault, really, and the basilisk fang dagger that had hummed at him, and the parchment in the same vault that mentioned the Chamber of Secrets in Salazar Slytherin's own handwriting. A basilisk, sealed in a chamber beneath the school, maintained in a kind of magical stasis for 1,000 years and periodically checked by the inheritor of Slytherin's line. The last inheritor had been Voldemort himself, 50 years ago, who had opened the chamber and let the basilisk loose and in doing so had killed a student. Harry had no intention of letting the basilisk loose. He had every intention of understanding it, because understanding something was the first step to not being afraid of it, and he was not particularly interested in being afraid of things. The Slytherin lordship gave him access to the chamber. He'd confirmed this from the parchment, a small, neat notation in Slytherin's hand: "The lord of the house may enter through the Parseltongue gate, below the second-floor lavatory, with the offering of intent." He'd looked up what offering of intent meant in Slytherin's magical tradition. It meant, simply, arriving with a clear statement of why you were there. After History of Magic he had a free period, which he spent in the Slytherin archive, a section of the lower library he'd accessed twice before, through the castle's own guidance, reviewing the chamber architecture. Then he had astronomy at lunchtime, which he was actually fond of because the tower was cold and clear and the telescope work was precise in a way that satisfied something in him. Then double defense with Quirrell, which was an exercise in patience. Quirrell had been getting worse. Harry had noticed it by inches, the trembling that was slightly more pronounced, the turban that he touched at odd moments, the way his eyes moved when he thought no one was watching. Luna had stopped sitting directly behind him after the second week, moving to the far side of the classroom with the quiet self-preservation of someone who could see what no one else could. Harry sat in defense and watched Quirrell stammer through a lesson on defensive jinxes that was technically competent but emotionally hollow, and kept his face attentive and pleasant and his magical signature as neutral as he could manage. He'd told Dumbledore about the two signatures. Dumbledore's plan, which he'd explained in their conversation last week, was to wait, to allow whatever Voldemort was seeking in the school to reveal itself before acting. He had something in the school that Voldemort wanted, something protected, something Harry hadn't been told the full details of yet. He didn't push on that, yet. He was filing it for when it became immediately necessary. After defense he went to find his friends. The second-floor girls' bathroom was abandoned. It had been abandoned for 50 years, everyone said, because it was haunted by the ghost of a girl named Moaning Myrtle who flooded the stalls at irregular intervals and sobbed loudly enough to discourage use. Myrtle herself was absent when the four of them arrived: Harry, Hermione, Neville, Luna, which was either fortunate timing or the castle smoothing their way. He was increasingly unable to rule out the castle smoothing their way. "Here," Harry said, moving to the row of sinks. He pressed his palm to the stone, felt the castle's Slytherin connection run through it like a cold current, and then looked at the sink at the far end, the one with the small carved serpent on the tap that you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. He addressed it in Parseltongue, which to his own ears sounded like talking but to the others apparently sounded like something between hissing and music: "Lord of the house, entering with clear intent. I come to speak, not to command. I come to understand, not to use." The sink moved. All of them moved, actually, the entire row swinging back like a circular door, revealing a wide shaft going down into darkness. "Merlin," Neville said softly. That's one of them, Luna said, nodding at the shaft in the tone of someone marking something off a list. Hermione had her wand out. Harry appreciated that she hadn't screamed or immediately tried to reason him out of going down, which showed how well she'd understood him in 3 weeks. Is there stairs, or, we slide, Harry said. He'd read the architecture notes. He stepped into the shaft and dropped. The descent was longer than he'd expected and faster than was comfortable, a smooth spiral through stone that deposited him in a dark corridor below the school's lower foundations. He cast Lumos immediately and the light bloomed steady and strong, partly from the wand and partly because the Gryffindor magic in him didn't much like darkness. Hermione arrived seconds later and added her own light. Then Neville, who arrived with more velocity than dignity and caught himself against the wall. Then Luna, who appeared as though the shaft had set her down gently. The corridor was stone and damp and very old. Snake motifs ran along the walls, carved into the stone itself, hundreds of them, in the sinuous interlocking patterns of Slytherin's decorative style. Harry walked without hesitation. The Slytherin connection was very strong down here, a cold current pulling him forward, and the chamber ahead was aware of his approach. The magic down here is extraordinary, Hermione said, running her wand along the wall. These carvings are alive. The stone is enchanted. She paused. This whole passage is a continuous enchantment. It's been running for 1,000 years. Salazar Slytherin was exceptional, Harry said. Whatever else he was. He was also a bigot, Hermione said. Yes, Harry agreed. Exceptional people frequently have catastrophically wrong ideas about specific things. It doesn't mean you ignore their work. It means you understand their work without inheriting their wrong ideas. Hermione opened her mouth. Closed it. That's, actually a useful distinction. I thought so too, Harry said. They reached the main chamber door, 2 enormous stone serpents, entwined, forming an arch over a door that was sealed with magic so old it had settled into the stone like sediment. Harry stepped forward and spoke in Parseltongue again, the offering of intent, the identification of lordship, and the door unsealed without drama, simply opened, the serpents sliding back as they'd been doing for 1,000 years whenever the right person arrived. The chamber was massive. That was the first thing. Long pillars, serpentine carvings, a shallow channel of water running the length of the floor, and at the far end, coiled around the base of a great stone statue of Salazar Slytherin himself, the basilisk. It was enormous. 40 feet long at least, scales a deep mottled green that was almost black in the Lumos light, and it was awake. Its eyes were shut, the great eyelids sealed, because it knew he was coming and it was being careful. The Parseltongue connection between a basilisk and the Lord of Slytherin was old enough that the basilisk understood, on some level, that killing the Lord was not permitted. Harry said, in Parseltongue, I am the Lord of the house. I am also the boy who came down here 3 times in his mind and felt you sleeping. I wanted to see you properly. The basilisk turned its sealed eye head toward him. Its tongue tasted the air. Then, slowly, it spoke. Not words exactly, because basilisks didn't speak in the way snakes spoke, but impressions, images, feelings that Harry's Parseltongue translated, alone. Long waiting. The last lord was not good. The one before was not good. You are different. How am I different? The older magic. You carry the older magic. The house has been waiting for it. Harry thought about the Emery's connection. The oldest magic in him, the one that had been dormant for 9 centuries. Yes, he said. I carry it. I'm not going to use you as a weapon. I'm not going to open you on people in this school. The basilisk's tongue tasted the air again. The last one came to do exactly that. Many years ago. I know. Harry thought of the Slytherin vault parchment, the death, the girl. That won't happen again. Not while I'm the Lord. A long stillness. The water in the channel barely moved. Hermione behind him had stopped breathing, he could tell, though he was also fairly certain she was taking very careful notes in her head. "What do you want?" the basilisk asked, in its slow impression language. "To understand you. To make sure you're well. And," he paused, considering, "to ask you something important." "Ask. Is there anyone else who has tried to come down here? Anyone who has touched the entrance above?" The basilisk's tongue moved rapidly. Images, a figure in a turban, coming to the entrance 3 times, pressing hands against the sink, failing to open it. Unable to speak the parcel tongue. Recent. Very recent. "Thank you," Harry said. "Rest well. I'll come back." He turned around and found Hermione and Neville and Luna all staring at him with varying degrees of amazement. Luna looked pleased. Neville looked like a man who had faced something enormous and found it less fatal than expected. Hermione looked like she was adding to an already very long list of things she needed to think about. "It confirmed Quirrell has been trying to get in," Harry said, in English. 3 times. "He can't open the entrance because he can't speak Parseltongue." "He's after something in here?" Neville asked. "Or he's after the basilisk itself." "A controlled basilisk is an extraordinary weapon." Harry looked around the chamber. "Or he's exploring pathways to something else in the school that has access points through Slytherin's original passages." He thought about Dumbledore's protected object. He thought about the connection between the dungeons and the lower school. "We need to tell Dumbledore," Hermione said. "I know," Harry said. But first, he turned to the stone plinth at the chamber's edge, which bore a carved box with the Slytherin crest. He pressed his ring to it and felt it open. Inside was a small folded parchment and beneath it, a stone vial with a silver stopper. The parchment said, in Salazar Slytherin's handwriting, "For the Lord of the House, Basilisk Venom Antidote. In case the creature is ever more startled than careful." Harry picked up the antidote vial and the parchment and put both carefully in his robe pocket. "Right," he said. "Let's go." He saw Dumbledore that evening before dinner. He relayed what he'd found, Quirrell's attempts to enter the chamber, the basilisk, the timeline. Dumbledore listened with the particular quality of attention he deployed when receiving information he'd already suspected was coming but needed confirmed. "The stone is in greater danger than I realized," Dumbledore said. "The Philosopher's Stone," Harry said. Because he'd known, in the way things assembled themselves when you had enough of the pieces. The troll incursion 2 weeks ago, which he'd handled efficiently, and which was a separate story involving him, Hermione, a corridor, and a piece of very precise Wingardium Leviosa, had been a distraction. An attempt to draw attention away from the 3rd floor. Everything was pointing the same direction. Dumbledore looked at him. Then he made the decision that Harry could see him making, the shift from management to trust, small and significant. "Yes," he said. "Nicholas Flamel's stone. It's here for protection." "The protections I designed are, I know about the protections," Harry said. "I've been in the 3rd floor corridor." "That was a restricted, the Gryffindor quarter ends at the 3rd floor east wing," Harry said. "I have access to everything in the east wing. The corridor with the Cerberus is in the east wing." He paused. "What I want to know is whether my reading of the situation is correct. Voldemort is currently in Quirrell's body, using him as a vessel. He's been trying to find a route to the stone. He's tried the chamber and failed. He'll try the direct route next." Dumbledore was quiet. "That is essentially correct." "Then we have time to prepare," Harry said. "He'll wait until he thinks the timing is right, probably until the school has other things to focus on. Christmas perhaps, when numbers thin. Or he'll manufacture a distraction." "Your thinking has been very similar to mine," Dumbledore said. "Good," Harry said. "Then we're not redundant. We can divide the work." The Slytherin thing happened the next day. He'd been thinking about it for 2 weeks, since the sorting, really, since the moment the hat had placed him in Gryffindor and he'd felt the castle wake up and thought about the Slytherin quarter, dormant, unaddressed, running on administrative inertia with no lord to direct it. The Slytherin students were operating in a house culture that had calcified around Voldemort's influence and the Malfoy family's social dominance and the particular cruelty that develops in an enclosed space where the wrong people have held authority for too long. He was the lord of the House of Slytherin. He had not done anything about that yet. He went to the Slytherin common room on Tuesday afternoon during the free period after lunch, alone, wearing his green robes and his ring, and he knocked on the entrance to the dungeon common room, the stone wall with the hidden latch that the castle had shown him, 3 times. Nothing happened for a moment. Then a prefect opened the door, a 5th-year girl with sharp eyes and the contained expression of someone who'd learned to keep her face very controlled. She looked at him with recognition and wariness in equal measure. "Lord Gryffindor," she said, with the particular precision of someone who'd been briefed on the legal situation. Her name was Gemma Farley, he knew from the roster he'd reviewed. House Prefect. Consistently high marks. Family neutral in the war, which in Slytherin terms meant they'd been clever enough to avoid committing publicly to anything. "Lord Slytherin," he said pleasantly. "I'd like to come in." A pause. The kind of pause that contained about 6 conversations simultaneously. Then she stepped aside. The Slytherin common room was beautiful in a cold way, low green lamps, stone and dark wood, the lake pressing against one wall behind enchanted glass, the occasional movement of something large and scaled in the water beyond. It was also very still. There were perhaps 15 students in the room, ranging from 2nd to 5th year, and when Harry stepped in every single one of them went quiet with the practiced social awareness of people who had learned that silence was sometimes the safest response. Draco Malfoy was there. He was sitting in the best armchair, because of course he was, with Crabbe and Goyle on either side, and he had the expression of a person who had anticipated this visit and had not yet decided how to respond to it. Harry looked around the room without hurry. He didn't make a speech. He didn't announce anything dramatic. He walked to the center of the room, which happened to also be the center of the Slytherin Quarter's foundational enchantments. He could feel it, the nexus point, the place where Salazar Slytherin had put the most concentrated piece of his house magic, and he pressed his palm to the floor. The room shifted. Not physically. The stones didn't move, the lamps didn't flare. But the magic in the room changed, the way a key changes when it finally meets the right lock. The Slytherin Quarter had been running without a lord for 50 years. Now the lord was here, and the house knew it, and the shift was visible to anyone sensitive enough to feel it, and every Slytherin in this room was sensitive enough to feel it, because Slytherins were selected for ambition and awareness and the kind of cunning that required good instincts. "I'm not here to make a speech," Harry said, because he'd thought carefully about how to play this and he'd concluded that speeches were exactly wrong for this audience. "You know who I am. You know what I hold. I have 3 things to say and then I'll leave you to your afternoon." He looked around the room. 20 pairs of eyes, various degrees of wariness, suspicion, calculation. Draco Malfoy's the most open of all of them, which was interesting. Draco's wariness was genuine but so was his curiosity, and Harry had learned enough about him over 2 months to know that the curiosity was the more important thing. "First," Harry said. "The Slytherin Quarter of this castle has been maintained by school administration for 50 years. That ends now. I'm taking direct responsibility for it. Any issues with maintenance, resources, or access that affect Slytherin House should be directed to Gemma Farley, who will direct them to me. This room," he let the warmth of the reconnected magic speak for itself, "is mine to tend to now. And I'll tend to it properly." A murmur. Not hostile. More like people recalibrating. "Second," he said. "The tradition in this house of excluding Muggle-born students from resource access, study partnerships, and social standing is over. Not because I'm ordering it, but because it is idiotic, and the students in this room are far too intelligent for idiotic traditions." He said it conversationally, without heat. "You are Slytherins. Slytherin values ambition and resourcefulness. Half-blood and Muggle-born students have been surviving in this school on less support than anyone else and consistently matching or exceeding students with every advantage. That is exactly the kind of resourcefulness this house should be celebrating, and you've been doing the opposite. Silence. The deep kind, where you can feel people thinking. He didn't look at Malfoy specifically, because calling Malfoy out by name would make this about Malfoy, and it wasn't. It was about the culture. Third, Harry said. I am not Voldemort. I am not your enemy. I'm not here to manage you or tell you what to believe. I'm here because this is my house as much as Gryffindor is, and I intend to make sure it functions the way it was designed to. He paused. Salazar Slytherin was exceptional and he was wrong about specific things. His house is built on his exceptional qualities, not his wrong ones. I intend to run it that way. He looked around the room one more time. Met eyes where they were offered. Then he walked to the door. He was almost out when Draco Malfoy said, in a voice stripped of its usual performance, Potter. Harry turned. Draco was standing. He'd left his armchair, a visible concession, Harry noted, because Draco Malfoy in his own common room was never the one who stood up. What you said at the feast, Draco said. About my father's choices being his choices. His jaw was set but his eyes were, complicated. Did you mean that? Yes, Harry said. You're not going to use it against me. I don't need leverage over you, Draco, Harry said. I need good people. If you're one, I'm not interested in what your father did. Draco stood very still for a moment. In the background, Crabbe and Goyle looked confused, which was their default setting. Gemma Farley was watching Draco with the expression of someone watching a very interesting variable change value. My father, Draco said carefully, is going to have an opinion about this. I know, Harry said. Tell him Lord Emery sends his regards. He left. Behind him, through the stone wall as it sealed, he heard the beginning of an eruption of noise, voices, argument, the sound of a room recalibrating itself. He kept walking. The fallout was immediate and diverse. By dinner that evening, the entirety of Hogwarts knew he'd visited the Slytherin common room, because secret information in a school of 500 children had a half-life of approximately 90 minutes. The Slytherin table at dinner was visibly different, not transformed, not friendly, but active in a way it hadn't been before, clusters of students talking intently, and the dynamic had clearly shifted in ways that hadn't yet resolved. The Gryffindor table received him with the mixed response of a house that had strong opinions about Slytherin and was currently dealing with the cognitive dissonance of their own lord being the lord of both. Fred and George Weasley gave him identical thumbs up from halfway down the table. Percy Weasley looked as though he wanted to say something about rules and thought better of it. Ron was watching him with an expression that had moved from wariness to something more thoughtful. McGonagall called him over at the end of dinner, which he'd expected. That was, she said, in the voice of someone who had made a decision about tone, quite a significant thing to do without prior consultation. Yes, Harry agreed. Did it cause administrative problems? McGonagall looked at him with the expression of someone who was also, somewhere under the professional severity, deeply amused. Not administrative ones. The staff meeting this afternoon was, lively. Good or bad lively? Flitwick was delighted. Sprout thought it was brave. Vector had questions. She paused. Snape had a strong reaction, Harry said. He had several, McGonagall said. He disagrees with the Lordships' authority over his house. I know, Harry said. I'll deal with that properly. He's the head of Slytherin. That's an administrative role and it's his. I'm the lord of the house. That's a foundational role and it's mine. There's room for both if we're sensible about it. And if he isn't sensible? McGonagall asked, with the smallest trace of something dry in her voice. Then I'll be sensible enough for both of us, Harry said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, your mother would have, well. She stopped. patted his shoulder once, briskly, and went back to the staff table. Harry returned to the Gryffindor table and found Hermione had saved him a plate. "How'd it go with McGonagall?" she asked. "Fine," he said. Flitwick was apparently delighted. Hermione nodded. "He told us in Charms this afternoon. He said, and I'm quoting exactly, 'Extraordinary young man. Completely unprecedented. I've been waiting 40 years for someone to do that.' Then he gave us all house points and went back to the lesson, but his feet barely touched the ground." Harry smiled. "Harry," Neville said, on his other side, looking at his pumpkin juice with the expression of someone working up to something, "what you said to the Slytherins. About the Muggle-born thing." He paused. "My grandmother, she's traditional in a lot of ways. She thinks about blood status differently than you do. She still has certain views." "I know," Harry said. "And she's still someone I respect for her knowledge and her experience and her genuine commitment to justice. She gets to be wrong about specific things. That's what people are." He looked at Neville. "It doesn't mean you can't push back on those things. It means you do it as her grandson who loves her, not as an enemy." Neville was quiet. "She'd probably respect that more than capitulation anyway," he said finally. "She would," Luna said, from nowhere in particular. "I know Augusta Longbottom's magical signature. There's a lot of iron in it. Iron respects iron." They ate dinner. The great hall continued its evening noise around them, and Harry let himself simply be in it for a while, a boy at dinner, with friends, listening to the ordinary sounds of a school at the end of a day. Then a paper crane appeared from the direction of the Slytherin table and landed on the table in front of him. He unfolded it. Inside, in a handwriting he recognized from the Housepoint documents he'd reviewed, "You should know that 3 fifth-years were planning to test your claim about the Muggleborns with a situation tomorrow. I've delayed it. But you should be ready." No signature. But the handwriting matched Gemma Farley's. He folded it back up and tucked it in his pocket. "Allies," Luna said, watching him. "Yes," Harry said. She smiled at her pumpkin juice. "The tide really is coming in now." What Gemma had called a situation turned out to be a fifth-year Slytherin named Marcus Warrington who had decided that the best way to test the new power balance was to publicly humiliate a Muggleborn second-year Slytherin named Stephanie Moon in a shared corridor between classes. Harry found out about it not because he'd been watching for it but because the castle told him. The Slytherin quarter's awareness had sharpened since Tuesday and corridor activity was part of what it tracked. He was between classes when the castle's Slytherin connection gave him a picture of the situation, and he redirected himself through a shorter route that the castle helpfully indicated, arriving in the third-floor east corridor to find Warrington and 2 friends cornering Stephanie Moon against a tapestry while she held her books against her chest and stared at them with the particular expression of someone who had learned not to show fear because showing it made things worse. Harry didn't run. He walked, at the pace of someone who had all the time in the world and no uncertainty about how this was going to resolve. Warrington saw him when he was 10 feet away and straightened, reassembling his expression from casual cruelty to a smirk. "Potter. This is Slytherin business." "Yes," Harry agreed. "It is." He stopped 3 feet from Warrington and looked at him with the flat attention of someone taking inventory. "Your name is Marcus Warrington. You're 5th year. Your OWL prediction marks are average to poor, which is interesting given your family's history of producing capable wizards." He tilted his head. "I've been reading the academic records." Warrington's smirk tightened. "You can't, the Lord of the House has access to House records," Harry said. "It's in the charter. I haven't been exercising it because I don't need to, but I've had it available." He glanced at Stephanie Moon. "Are you all right?" She stared at him. "Yes," she said, after a moment. He looked back at Warrington. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to go to class. You're going to think very carefully about how you want to spend the next 2 years in a house where the Lord is paying attention and has access to your academic record, your behavioral record, and the authority to recommend you for disciplinary review without involving the headmaster. He paused. I'm not threatening you. I'm describing the situation accurately. Warrington stared at him. He was 6 inches taller and 4 years older, and both of those things were entirely irrelevant, and on some level he knew it, because the magic coming off Harry Potter in the third-floor corridor was not the magic of a first-year student having a confrontation, it was something older and colder and completely steady. Warrington left. His friends left. The corridor was quiet. Harry turned to Stephanie Moon. Sorry about that. She was looking at him with an expression that was working through several things. She was a small girl with bright eyes and ink on 2 of her fingers, and a clear evidence of someone who was genuinely academically capable and had been spending considerable effort trying to be invisible. You're Lord Slytherin, she said. Among other things, Harry said. My parents are going to think I made that up, she said. Tell them Lord Emery sends his regards, Harry said, which was becoming his standard response to this class of situation, and apparently worked, because she laughed, a quick, genuine laugh that seemed to surprise her, and went to class. He went to class too. In the evening, a barn owl arrived with a letter from Lucius Malfoy. It came through the Gringotts post again, because that was still how his significant correspondence arrived, and Ragnarok had apparently been intercepting his personal post for screening purposes, which Harry had authorized back in September without asking too many questions about the methods involved. The letter was 3 pages of very controlled, formal language that was clearly written by a man who was extremely angry and was handling it by being excessively precise. It addressed the lordship claims with careful acknowledgement. Lucius Malfoy was too politically sophisticated to simply deny what he couldn't disprove, and then made several points about the traditions of Slytherin House, the appropriate role of a lord in house affairs versus the operational authority of the head of house, and finally, in the last paragraph, an oblique suggestion that certain historical sensitivities within the house community required delicate management that a lord, without appropriate contextual understanding, might inadvertently destabilize. Historical sensitivities was, Harry translated, Voldemort support. He wrote back on Emery's crested parchment. He kept it short. 11 lines. Dear Mr. Malfoy, thank you for your letter. I note your concerns regarding house tradition and operational management, and I share your respect for Slytherin's remarkable history. The contextual understanding you reference will develop with time and through direct experience with the house community, which I found more sophisticated and adaptive than recent reputation suggested. Regarding historical sensitivities, I hold the Slytherin lordship by legal right of survival, blood mark, and Parseltongue gift. Whatever previous affiliation the house culture developed in recent decades, the house itself answers to its lord, and I am its lord. I look forward to meeting you in person when the occasion arises. Lord H. J. Potter Peverell Gryffindor Slytherin Emrys. He sealed it and sent it. That's going to make him angrier, Hermione said, when he showed her. He's going to be angry regardless, Harry said. The question is whether he thinks there's any path where working with me is more useful than working against me. A polite but completely firm letter gives him that possibility. She considered. It also establishes that you understand what he was actually saying. Which tells him I'm not naive, Harry said. Which is the most important thing to establish with people like Lucius Malfoy. He won't respect weakness, and he can't manage you if you're not confused. Hermione looked at the letter. Then at Harry. Where did you learn all of this? She asked, and it was a genuine question, not a rhetorical one. You're 11. I'm 11. I've read more books than almost anyone, and I didn't know half of what you know about political navigation. Harry thought about how to answer that honestly. 10 years of watching very carefully, he said. When you live with people who have power over you and use it badly, you learn exactly how power works, the real mechanisms of it, not the official ones. You learn what motivates people who think they can do what they want. You learn how to predict them. Hermione was quiet for a moment. The Dursleys, she said. They were a very thorough education, Harry said, without particular bitterness. because it was true, and bitterness was only useful when it motivated something, which it currently didn't. She looked at him with the expression she got when she was adding things to her understanding of him, not pity, which he wouldn't have accepted, but something closer to the respect of a person recognizing that a thing has cost something to build. "Well," she said. "For what it's worth. You're nothing like what that was supposed to make you." Harry thought about the cupboard. The warmth in his chest that had been singing since midnight in July. "No," he agreed. "I'm not." The November wind rattled the common room windows. Outside, the grounds were dark and cold and enormous. Inside, the fire was warm and his friends were around him, and the castle was humming its low foundational note. The Gryffindor and Slytherin quarters both awake now, both oriented toward him, both doing the quiet work of a house that has come back to itself. He opened his Transfiguration homework and got to work. Chapter 5, The Peveril Shadow. November arrived the way November does in Scotland, not as a season but as a verdict. The sky locked itself into a flat grey permanence, and the temperature dropped until the lake stopped reflecting and started looking like hammered pewter, and the wind off the mountains had an edge to it that made every crossing of the grounds feel like a small argument you were losing. Harry didn't mind the cold. The Gryffindor quarter ran warmer than the rest of the school and his dormitory was comfortable, but more than that, there was something about the sharpness of the November air that suited the way his mind was working, clear and stripped down, no softness to blur anything. He'd been thinking about the Hallows. Not constantly, and not obsessively, because obsession was a trap he'd identified early and avoided carefully. But they were there in his thinking the way important things are, present, weighted, returning. 3 objects. The Elder Wand, currently in Dumbledore's possession. The Resurrection Stone, in the Slytherin vault with the cracked black stone that Ragnarok had warned him about. And the cloak. He'd found the cloak in the Potter vault, in a case he'd missed on his first visit because Ragnarok had been moving quickly and it had been on a lower shelf with no particular marking. He'd found it during his second Gringotts visit in late October, a second scheduled meeting with Ragnarok to review estate progress and ministry response timelines, and he'd recognized it immediately, the way he'd recognized the sword. An invisibility cloak so fine it barely existed, the silk of it between his fingers like cold water, and the Peveril connection in his chest responding with a deep resonant pull that was entirely different from how it responded to anything else. He'd worn it home. Or rather, he'd worn it back to the Hogwarts side of the Floo, because the Gringotts Floo dropped him at the Hogshead in Hogsmeade, and he'd walked back across the grounds in late October afternoon wearing a cloak that made him invisible and thinking about what the Hallows actually were. The Peveril texts, which he'd now read 3 times, including the most technical sections on Hallow theory, were more philosophically complex than he'd expected. The Hallows weren't weapons or tools in the conventional sense. They were, according to the oldest parchment in the Peveril archive, acknowledgements. The Elder Wand was death acknowledging power, the stone was death acknowledging grief, and the cloak was death acknowledging acceptance. Each one addressed a fundamental human relationship with mortality. Each one had, in the wrong hands, driven people to extraordinary destruction. But in the right hands, the hands of someone who understood what each one was an acknowledgement of, they were something else. Something he didn't have a word for yet. He kept the cloak in the inner pocket of his robes, next to the 5 lordship letters, because it felt right there. He wore it occasionally, not to hide, hiding wasn't his style, but to think. There was something about invisibility that sharpened observation. When no one could see you, you saw everything. The first significant thing he saw while invisible was Quirrell. It was a Tuesday evening, 11 days into November, and Harry had been using the cloak to do what he privately labeled architecture review, walking the school's corridors at night to map the actual layout, which differed substantially from the maps in any published book, because Hogwarts rearranged itself in ways that were only fully legible to someone with access to the foundational enchantments. He'd been doing this systematically, floor by floor, and he was on the 7th floor when he heard footsteps coming from the direction of the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy. He pressed himself against the wall and watched. Quirrell came around the corner moving with a purposefulness entirely unlike his classroom manner. The shuffling anxiety was gone, not reduced, gone, replaced by something fluid and directed that suggested the anxiety was performance and whatever was underneath it was considerably more capable. He walked past Harry without pausing, which meant he couldn't detect the cloak, which was useful information. Quirrell stopped in front of a section of blank wall opposite the tapestry, stood very still, and then did something Harry recognized after a moment as an attempt to access a room that required a specific magical intent to materialize. The wall didn't respond. Quirrell's hands tightened. He walked back and forth 3 times. Harry watched this with interest, because that was the right action, but the door didn't appear. Harry understood why after a moment, feeling the castle's response to Quirrell's attempt. The room existed. But it was in the Gryffindor quarter, and the Gryffindor quarter had a lord now, and the lord had instinctively, 2 weeks ago, set a preference into the quarter's enchantments. Rooms in his section required either his presence or his express permission to open for others. He hadn't consciously decided to do that. The castle had offered the option and he'd accepted without fully articulating what he was accepting. It was interesting that it had already mattered. Quirrell stood in front of the blank wall for another long moment. The quality of the stillness around him shifted, something colder and more controlled moving through him, the second signature Luna had described, pressing against the surface of Quirrell's fear. Then he turned and walked back the way he'd come, and Harry let him go. He pressed his palm to the wall where Quirrell had been standing. "What's in there?" he asked the castle, in the way he'd learned to ask, not words exactly, more like extending the question through the connection. The castle showed him a room full of mirrors. Miscellaneous magical objects in storage. And one thing that wasn't storage, a mirror set apart from the others, propped against the back wall, with a quality about its magic that was enormous and complex and old. He filed it. He went back to Gryffindor Tower and lay in his bed thinking about Quirrell moving without his classroom fear, about 2 magical signatures in one body, about a mirror in a room that Voldemort had been trying to reach. In the morning he went to Dumbledore before breakfast. "The mirror of Erist," Dumbledore said, when Harry described it. "Yes. I moved it there a week ago. It was on the 3rd floor and I believed it needed relocation." "You moved it to a Gryffindor quarter room," Harry said. A pause. "I wasn't certain that's what I was doing." "But the room wouldn't open for Quirrell," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him with the expression that appeared sometimes in their conversations, the one where the elaborate management of his own expectations collided with what Harry actually was. "It wouldn't," he confirmed. "No. You need to move it again," Harry said. "Somewhere I control more deliberately. If it's in a room that requires my intent to open, then it's currently protected by my unconscious habit. I'd rather it be protected by something I've chosen." "Where did you have in mind?" "The Chamber of Secrets," Harry said. Dumbledore blinked. That was rare enough to be worth noting. "The chamber. The basilisk won't harm it. Nothing can access the chamber except me. It's underneath the castle's normal magical detection range, which means Voldemort can't feel it from where he's sitting in Quirrell's skull." He paused. "Unless you have a reason why the stone shouldn't go somewhere completely inaccessible." Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. "The stone is currently within the mirror. The mirror protects it through its own enchantment, only someone who desires to find it and not use it can retrieve it." "So someone selfish can't get it," Harry said. "That's elegant." He thought about it. "But if Voldemort finds the mirror, he'll find a way around that. He always finds a way around elegant single solutions." He met Dumbledore's eyes. He had 50 years to think in a disembodied state. "He's thought of things we haven't." Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. "You have a great deal of faith in your own assessment of Voldemort's capabilities." "I have a piece of his soul in my scar," Harry said, flatly. "He's been in my head in some form since I was a year old. I know how he thinks the way you know a song that's been playing in the background your entire life." He paused. "That's not pleasant information, but it's accurate." Dumbledore received that with the stillness of a man absorbing something he'd feared was true. "The chamber," he said finally. If you're willing to guard it, I'm not just willing, Harry said. It's mine to guard. That's what lordships are for. Not titles and property, responsibility. Moving the mirror took a week of planning and an evening of careful work. Dumbledore handled the mirror's physical relocation. Harry opened the chamber and spoke to the basilisk in advance, explaining what was coming and why. The basilisk had been amenable. The shiny door thing, it conveyed in its impression language, with the confusing magic inside. Yes. I will not eat it. Harry appreciated the cooperation and the clarity. The stone sat in the chamber now, in the mirror, in the safest place in the school. During that week, the Peveril connection was noticeably active. He felt it most sharply on Wednesday evening when he was alone in the common room late, revising Charm's theory, and the connection gave him a sudden precise impression of the Elder Wand, not its location, which he knew, but its state. It had been used that day. Recently. The connection between a Peveril Lord and the Hallows was something the texts had described as recognition, not control, because the Hallows couldn't be controlled, but awareness. He knew when they were used the way you know when someone has moved something in your house. The Elder Wand had been used. By Dumbledore. For something significant, the warmth of the power echo was enormous. He thought about the stone's new location and wondered if Dumbledore had done some additional protective enchantment and felt better for it, but filed it carefully. The resurrection stone, in its vault, remained sealed. He didn't go near it. Not yet. The cloak was in his pocket. All three Hallows were in a complex dynamic with each other, with him, and with the Peveril Lordship, and he was beginning to understand that this dynamic was not something he could fully map from theory. It was something he was going to have to navigate as it developed. He was comfortable with that. He'd been navigating things he couldn't fully map since he was old enough to understand the Dursley household. The Quidditch match on Saturday was Gryffindor versus Slytherin, which was, in Harry's first year, a fact that he found significantly funnier than anyone else seemed to. He was playing Seeker for Gryffindor because Madame Hooch had made the recommendation to McGonagall and McGonagall had reviewed his flying capability herself and produced a Nimbus 2000 from somewhere with the air of someone who had been waiting to give it to him since the moment the recommendation landed on her desk. He'd been practicing 3 mornings a week at dawn, alone in the sky over the pitch, and he was genuinely good, which was different from being good at most things because flying was not about study or knowledge or preparation. It was about instinct and presence and a quality of attention that was entirely physical. He was good at it in the way that some people are good at music, at the level where the instrument becomes an extension of intention. The morning of the match Hermione was anxious in the way she was anxious about things she couldn't control, which manifested as over-thoroughness with her revision and a tendency to offer him toast he didn't need. Neville was quietly supportive. Luna appeared at breakfast wearing lion head earrings and a Gryffindor scarf 3 times too long for her neck and said, "You'll catch it in the first 12 minutes, with the confidence of a weather forecast." "How confident?" Harry asked. She considered. "Steady breeze," she said. "Not a certainty. But the wind's right." He ate his breakfast and thought about the match the way he'd thought about the ministry meeting with Fudge. Not with anxiety but with the focused attention of someone mapping a situation. The Slytherin team was older and heavier and had better brooms as a unit, but their seeker, a third-year named Terence Higgs, was technically competent without being exceptional. The Gryffindor team had Oliver Wood, who had the strategic intensity of a military commander and had given Harry precisely enough tactical briefing to be useful without crossing into overwhelming. "Quirrell's going to be there," Hermione said, quietly, when they were walking to the pitch. "I know. If he does something during the match, he won't," Harry said. "Too visible. Too many people. If he wants to get at me he'll want a controlled situation." He paused. "He's also becoming less stable. The 2-signature situation is getting worse. Luna said Tuesday that the second one is getting brighter and the first one is getting dimmer." Hermione looked troubled. "Quirrell himself, you mean? He's being consumed." "Something like that," Harry said. "Which means the timeline is moving. Voldemort is getting impatient. Are you worried?" Harry thought about it honestly. No, he said. But I'm very alert. She looked at him sidelong. Is there a difference? Yes, he said. Worry uses energy. Alert saves it. She processed this. That's either very healthy or very alarming. Probably both, Harry said, and jogged ahead to where Wood was pacing at the entrance to the changing rooms. The match lasted 11 minutes. Not because it was easy, the first 4 minutes were some of the most physical and concentrated attention Harry had ever focused on anything, tracking the snitch's movements against a sky full of bludgers and players and the roar of 500 students. Higgs was good. He'd spotted the snitch at roughly the same moment Harry had, coming around the east goal post, a flash of gold in the low November sunlight, and both seekers had broken for it simultaneously. What Higgs had that Harry didn't: experience, a faster broom by a marginal amount, and the ruthlessness of someone who'd been playing this game for 2 years. What Harry had: reflexes honed by 3 months of dawn practice, a broomstick that responded to intention as much as input, and the particular quality of attention he brought to everything, which meant he wasn't just tracking the snitch but tracking Higgs, tracking the snitch and making decisions based on the trajectory of someone else's pursuit rather than the object itself. He let Higgs get half a length ahead. Let him commit to the angle. Then changed his own angle by 45 degrees and dove, not toward where the snitch was but toward where the snitch was going to be in 3 seconds when Higgs' approach pushed it down and left. He caught it at 30 feet above the ground, closing his fingers around gold and warmth and the end of the match, and would scream something from the goalposts that he couldn't hear over the crowd. He landed on the pitch grass with the snitch in his fist and the November wind in his face and 500 people making noise, and it was good. Simply, directly good. The specific joy of a thing done well in a body that was built for it. What happened next was not part of the plan. He became aware of it mid-celebration, when Oliver Wood had grabbed him by the shoulders and was saying something about points, and Harry felt the Peveril connection give a sharp cold pulse that it had never given before, not like the Elder Wand's daily pulse, not like the stone's sealed stillness, but something different. Something pointing. Something warning. He went still under Wood's hands. Harry. Wood blinked. Are you, in a moment, Harry said. He closed his eyes. Extended the Peveril awareness. Cast it out in the direction the pulse was pointing, which was, the staff stands. And in the staff stands, he opened his eyes and looked directly at Quirrell. Quirrell was looking back at him. Not with his classroom anxiety and not with the purposeful control Harry had seen in the 7th floor corridor. Something else. Something that was entirely the second signature, looking out through Quirrell's eyes with a flat red quality that had nothing human left in it. Harry held that gaze for 3 seconds. Then Quirrell blinked, looked away, stood up, and left the stands. The Peveril warning pulse subsided. Harry breathed out. Right, he said, and let Oliver Wood finish whatever he'd been saying about points. He went to Dumbledore that evening and reported it. Dumbledore's response was measured but his eyes were not. Behind the half-moon spectacles they were sharp and very awake, the eyes of a man who had been expecting a moment like this to arrive. He's ready to make a move, Harry said. Yes. Dumbledore's hands were folded. I believe so. I've been preparing. What's the plan when he does? The protections around the stone will hold, Dumbledore said. Even if he reaches the chamber, he can't open it without you. He'll try to use me, Harry said. Either directly, come at me and try to take my access, or through Quirrell, using my lordship connection to the chamber against me somehow. Dumbledore nodded. I've thought about that scenario. And? You should not be alone, Dumbledore said. Not in the next several weeks. My friends, are children, Dumbledore said, gently. They are remarkable children, but, they're the people I trust, Harry said. And they're more capable than you're crediting. Hermione Granger's magical theory is second-year standard already. Neville Longbottom's actual casting is significantly better than his self-assessment suggests. I've been working with him 3 times a week. Luna Lovegood sees things that no monitoring system can replicate. He met Dumbledore's eyes. I'm not saying send them into a fight. I'm saying they're assets, and I'd like you to treat them as assets. Dumbledore was quiet. You are very loyal to the people you choose. Yes, Harry said. It's a character flaw I've decided not to correct. The corner of Dumbledore's mouth moved. Not quite a smile but the architecture of one. You should also know, I intend to be here. Whatever happens. I will not go far from this school while Voldemort remains in residence. If he tries to move you out, Harry said. Fake emergency, ministry summons, I'll be suspicious of exactly that, Dumbledore said. Yes. He looked at Harry with a directness that had been building across their conversations over the past 2 months, the managed warmth slowly giving way to something more honest. I want you to know, and you may already know this, you tend to already know things, that I have been wrong in specific ways about how to handle you. I said so in September. I mean it more thoroughly now than I did then. I know, Harry said. It doesn't fully excuse, it doesn't need to excuse anything, Harry said. It just needs to be different going forward. He stood up. We're going to get through whatever Voldemort is planning. And after that, there are about 6 other things that need addressing. I've made a list. Dumbledore's eyes were genuinely warm now. I imagine it's well organized. Hermione helped, Harry said, and left. The trap, when it came, didn't come from Voldemort. It came from Draco Malfoy. Not directly, and not intentionally hostile, which was what made it complicated. On a Wednesday evening in the 3rd week of November, Draco appeared at the entrance to the Gryffindor common room, which in itself was so unprecedented that the fat lady spent 20 seconds cycling through expressions before she thought to go get someone. She got Harry, because she'd apparently decided that things involving Harry were Harry's business, and Harry came down the stairs and found Draco standing in the corridor looking like a person who had made a decision he wasn't entirely sure about. Malfoy, Harry said. Potter, Draco said. Then, with the effort of someone doing a thing for the first time, Harry. Harry waited. Draco looked at the fat lady's portrait, which was making no pretense of not listening. Can we? Harry stepped out into the corridor, letting the portrait close. They stood in the empty corridor, 2 first years in the middle of a castle that was very full of history, and Draco said, My father wrote. After your letter. I expected that, Harry said. He told me to position myself. Draco's jaw was set. To get close to you. To find out what you know and what you're planning. Harry looked at him for a moment. You came to tell me that. Yes. Why? Draco was quiet. He was doing the thing Harry had noticed about him over 2 months, the private process of someone very intelligent stripping away the performance to find what was actually underneath it. Because I've been watching you since September, he said. And what you said in the Slytherin common room. And what you do, how you handle things. And he stopped. My father wants me to be his instrument in this. I'm tired of being people's instruments. And you seem to be the only person in this school who actually does what they say they'll do. Harry looked at him for another moment. Then he said, the information he's asking for, I won't give it, Draco said. That's why I'm telling you. So you know I won't. I believe you, Harry said. Draco blinked. He'd been prepared for something else, suspicion, probably, or conditions. The immediate belief seemed to cost him something to receive. Just like that. You came and told me unprompted, Harry said. That's not the behavior of someone planning to deceive me. It's the behavior of someone who needed the act of telling me to be as important as the information itself. He paused. Which means you needed to commit to it. To make it real by saying it out loud. Draco stared at him. That's accurate. A pause. Yes, Draco said. Yes, it is. Your father is going to expect information, Harry said. Which puts you in a difficult position. You can't give him real information. But you can't give him nothing without him knowing something has changed. He thought about it. What does he actually need to know to be satisfied? Draco understood immediately, because he was sharp enough to follow the direction of the conversation with half the explanation. He needs to think I'm working on it. That I'm still positioned to find things out. Then tell him I'm cautious and trust building slowly, Harry said. That I'm intelligent and not easily manipulated and that gaining real access will take time. All of which is true, which makes it sustainable as a story. He paused. And it gives me time to decide what to do about your father long term. Draco was quiet for a moment. You're going to have to deal with him eventually, he said. He's not going to stop. I know, Harry said. But eventually and now are different things, and I have enough on my plate right now to keep myself occupied. Something shifted in Draco's face, the last layer of the performance dropping away, leaving something younger and more uncertain and considerably more interesting. The thing in the school, he said. The Quirrell situation. People in Slytherin are talking about it. About the fact that he's not right. What are they saying? That it's connected to the Dark Lord. He said it without the reverence some Slytherins still attached to the title. That someone's testing the school's defenses. That, he paused. That you already know about it. I do, Harry said. Are you going to do something about it? When the time comes, Harry said. Yes. Draco looked at him. Then he said, quietly, with the particular vulnerability of someone asking something they've been not asking for a long time, the Dark Lord, if he came back properly. What would that mean for people like me? Harry understood the question. It meant, I was raised to support him. My father supported him. What does it mean for me if the thing I was raised toward becomes real again? It means you've already made the most important choice, Harry said. You're standing in this corridor telling me the truth instead of going back to your dormitory and writing your father a useful letter. That's the choice that matters. He paused. Whatever comes after, and something will come after, probably not this year but eventually, I remember what people did when it mattered. And I remember what people didn't do. Draco absorbed that. His spine was straight but his eyes were different than Harry had ever seen them. Not the Malfoy heir performing confidence. Just a boy who'd walked into a corridor and said a true thing and was still standing. Right, Draco said. He straightened his robes. The performance came back, but less complete than before, with gaps in it that Harry could see through. I should get back. Draco, Harry said, as he turned. He turned back. Tell your father you're taking it slowly. And, if anything happens on that front that you think I should know about, come and find me. Harry met his eyes. I meant what I said in September. Family choices and personal choices are different things. Draco held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded, once, and walked away. The direct confrontation with Quirrell came 4 days later. Harry had known it was coming, had felt the Peverell warning escalating since Saturday's match, had felt the Slytherin awareness tracking Quirrell's movements through the lower school, had felt the timing moving towards something the way a thunderstorm has a distinct pressure before the lightning. He told Hermione and Neville and Luna to stay visible in the common room that Friday evening and not to come after him if he was late, which Hermione had responded to with a 19-second pause and then a very controlled, all right, that cost her considerably. He was in the library. 9:30. Late enough that the library should have been empty, which it was, just him and the lamplight and his notes, and when Quirrell came through the door, Harry was sitting in his chair with his book open and his wand on the table beside his right hand and the cloak folded in his pocket. Professor Quirrell, Harry said, without looking up. Quirrell closed the library door. His footsteps crossed the stone floor. When he came into the lamplight his face was wrong, both faces at once, the anxious professor one and the cold-controlled one underneath, and tonight the underneath one was winning. "I think," Quirrell said, and his stammer was worse than usual but also hollow, a habit of speech that didn't match the clarity of his eyes, that we should each have a conversation. "All right," Harry said. He closed his book and looked at Quirrell directly. The stutter dropped. "You know what I am," Quirrell said, in a voice that was his and wasn't, the vocal cords producing something smoother and colder than anything Quirrell had presumably sounded like before last year. "You have known for some time. 2 magical signatures in one body," Harry said. "You've been under sustained possession. The secondary signature has been getting stronger since September, which means the possession is deepening and Professor Quirrell himself is, less and less the one making decisions. The professor," said the voice through Quirrell's mouth, "is still present enough to know he is losing." A pause that felt almost contemplative. "You are nothing like what I prepared for." "What did you prepare for?" Harry asked. "A grieving child," the voice said. "Dumbledore's instrument. Manageable." A pause. "I have studied you carefully from this position. You are not manageable." "No," Harry agreed. "And yet you are 11 years old," the voice said. "You carry 5 lordships and a prodigious natural gift. But you are still a child in experience. You have not felt real loss yet. You have not felt the specific quality of despair that breaks people." The quality in the voice was not threatening, exactly. More like, academic. Evaluating. "I made my first Horcrux at 16. I had more power than anyone in this school by 18. I had more power than your friend Dumbledore by 25. And yet, here I am." Harry said nothing. He was listening carefully. Not for weakness, he wasn't naive enough to look for that in this conversation, but for information. "You want to know why I'm talking to you," the voice said. "Yes," Harry said. "Because I am currently occupying a man whose body is deteriorating. Because what I want, the stone, the restoration of proper form, is locked inside a chamber under this school that I cannot access without you." The voice paused. "I have found, after 50 years of considering it, that direct compulsion of unwilling parties produces considerably less effective results than a negotiated arrangement. So I am negotiating." Harry looked at Quirrell's face, at the hollowed eyes, the thinning quality of the person behind them, and felt something that was not quite pity and not quite anger but contained elements of both. "There's nothing to negotiate," Harry said. "You haven't heard the terms." "It doesn't matter," Harry said. "Not because I'm not interested in deals, deals are often efficient. But because there's no version of this deal where I give you the stone and the outcome is good for anyone I've chosen to protect." He paused. "You know that. You're testing whether I know it." A silence. Then something happened that Harry registered as profoundly unexpected. The voice, Voldemort, using Quirrell's mouth in a library at 9:30 on a Friday night, laughed. It was a short sound, and cold, but it was genuine. "You have your mother's mind," it said. Something moved in Harry's chest, not the lordship warmth, not the Peverell connection, but something older and more primal. "Don't," he said, quietly. "I don't say it as flattery," the voice said. "I say it as observation. Lily Potter had the clearest mind I encountered in 30 years of encountering minds. She saw situations without sentiment. She acted on what was actually there rather than what she wished was there." A pause. "She was the only person who ever made a choice that cost me everything. I don't disparage her." Harry looked at Quirrell's face for a long time. The Peverell connection was very active, the warning pulse steady now, and the cloak in his pocket was almost warm. The other Hallow presence, the stone, distant in the chamber, pulsed once. "I know what you are," Harry said. "Not just what you are now, what you chose to become. You were extraordinary once. Exceptionally, genuinely, historically extraordinary. And you used all of it to become afraid of dying, and everything after that was in service of that fear." He held Quirrell's gaze. "You split your soul 7 times. You put pieces of yourself into objects. You turned yourself into something that can't die easily but also can't live properly. And you're still afraid. More afraid than when you started, because now you have more to lose. The silence was absolute. You're 11, the voice said, and for the first time it sounded, not exactly uncertain, but aware of something it hadn't fully prepared for. Yes, Harry said. And I have a piece of your soul in my scar. Which means I've been carrying your fear in my head since I was a year old. I know what it feels like from the inside. I don't pity you for it, but I understand it and I am not afraid of it. He stood up, picking up his wand. You're not going to get the stone. Not through me, not through the protections on the chamber, not through any angle you've tried and not through any you haven't thought of yet. And you're burning through Quirrell, he hasn't got long at the rate you're using him. When he's gone, you'll need a new host, and starting over will cost you months. The voice was very still. Go, Harry said. Not angrily. Just clearly. Not because I'm afraid of you. Because this conversation is over and I don't want to watch you destroy what's left of Professor Quirrell in a library. Quirrell stood in the lamplight for a long moment. The two signatures pressed against each other, one cold and furious and deeply calculating, running through scenarios and finding none that produced the outcome it needed, and one, the remains of the man named Quirinus Quirrell, barely present now, barely a candle flame. Then Quirrell turned and walked out of the library. Harry sat back down. He put his wand flat on the table. His hands were entirely steady. He was not afraid. He was very awake, and very focused, and at some level deeply sad, not for Voldemort, but for the shape of things that could have been different and weren't. He sat alone in the library for 15 minutes, letting the various magical signatures settle back to their baseline. The Peveril warning pulse faded. The Emery's magic, which had been present just beneath the surface during the conversation, receded slowly, like water pulling back after a wave. Then he went back to the common room. Hermione was in the chair by the fire, pretending to read. She looked up when he came through. She read his face with the speed of someone who had learned to read it well. How bad? She asked. Not bad, he said. Educational. He sat down across from her. He's going to make a move soon. Before the end of term. His host is failing and he's getting desperate. You spoke to him? She asked, with the focused alarm of someone hearing this casually for the first time. He came to negotiate, Harry said. I declined. Hermione put her book down fully. You, Harry, I'm fine, he said. Genuinely. He was testing me the same way I've been testing everyone else this term. Looking for leverage, looking for a weak point, looking for something to use. He met her eyes. He didn't find one. Hermione looked at him for a long moment. Then, what was he like? Actually. Harry thought about it honestly. Very intelligent. Very tired. Genuinely frightened under all the cold. He paused. He mentioned my mother. Hermione said nothing. She waited, knowing him well enough to know that was the right thing to do. He said she had the clearest mind he'd encountered in 30 years, Harry said. Which from Voldemort is possibly the most accurate tribute she could receive. Hermione looked at him with the warmth she had for him that was specific and real and not performed. She did, she said. Obviously. Look at what she built. Harry looked at the fire. The warmth in his chest, the 5 lordship warmth, the foundational thing, the thing that had been singing since midnight in July, was quiet and steady. We need to prepare, he said. Whatever he tries, it'll be before Christmas. I need you and Neville to be ready. Not to fight, I'll deal with him directly if it comes to it, but to be ready to act on specific instructions quickly and without hesitation. Of course, Hermione said immediately. And I need to tell Dumbledore tomorrow about the library conversation. He'll want to know the timeline has moved. He'll also want to know Voldemort tried to negotiate with you directly, Hermione said. That's significant. Yes, Harry said. It means he's more desperate than he's showing. Voldemort doesn't negotiate unless the other options have failed. Which means you've already beaten him, Hermione said. Harry shook his head. Not yet. But he knows I'm going to. Outside, the November wind pressed against the tower windows. The fire burned. The castle breathed. And somewhere below the school, in the deep darkness of a chamber sealed in Parseltongue and Lordship magic, the Philosopher's Stone sat in a mirror that showed people what they most desired, keeping its own calm counsel. And in the mirror of Eriste, reflecting what Harry Potter most desired, which was not the stone, not the power, not the protection, but a thing far simpler and far more complicated than any of those, were two people, a man with messy dark hair and a woman with bright green eyes, standing close together and looking at their son. As they had been looking, patiently, since the first day the mirror was made. Chapter 6, The Emrys Awakening. The letter from Amelia Bones arrived on a Monday in early December, 3 weeks after the library. It came through the Gringotts owl at breakfast, landing with the weight of something official and the particular gravity of a letter that had clearly been composed by someone who chose their words carefully and meant every one of them. Amelia Bones, director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, wrote with the precision of a career prosecutor and the directness of someone who had spent 30 years being lied to by people who thought she wasn't paying attention. The letter was 6 paragraphs. Harry read it twice, which was once more than he usually needed. The first paragraph acknowledged receipt of his emergency petition regarding Sirius Black and confirmed that the DMLE had conducted a preliminary review. The second paragraph stated, in language stripped of all equivocation, that no formal trial record existed for Sirius Black. No Wisengamot hearing. No testimony. No formal charge sheet. A single processing order signed by Bartemius Crouch Sr. under emergency provisions that had not been intended for this application of the law. The third paragraph noted that this constituted a significant procedural failure. The fourth paragraph said that the DMLE was prepared to support an emergency Wisengamot session and would provide full documentation. The fifth said that Bones herself would attend and provide testimony. The sixth said, I should note that I have been aware of anomalies in this case for several years and have lacked the procedural mechanism to address them. The Emrys emergency petition provides exactly that mechanism. I am grateful someone has finally used it. Harry folded the letter, put it in his breast pocket with the Lordship letters, and looked at Hermione. She'd been reading over his shoulder. Her jaw was set. She's been waiting for this, she said. She's the best person in the ministry, Harry said. Possibly the only genuinely good one in senior leadership. He'd read her file in August, from Ragnarok's comprehensive briefing on ministry personnel. Amelia Bones, rigorous, fair, politically difficult for exactly those reasons, consistently sidelined by Fudge's preference for people who were manageable. She needs the emergency session to happen fast. Before Fudge decides he's more afraid of what comes out than he is of me. When? Hermione asked. Before Christmas, Harry said. 2 weeks. Which means I need to file the formal session request through Gringotts today and I need the date confirmed before the end of the week. Neville, on his other side, was very still in the way that meant he was processing something large. If Sirius Black is released, he said carefully, what happens next? He needs medical care, Harry said. 12 years in Azkaban, the Dementor exposure alone is going to have significant effects. He'll need somewhere safe to go. He'd thought about this. The Potter properties included Godric's Hollow, which was damaged, and 3 other estates. The Peveril family had a house in Wiltshire. I've been looking at the properties. There's a place in the Scottish borders that's been maintained by Gringotts Estate Management since 1981. Warm. Private. Warded. He paused. I'd like him to have somewhere to go that's actually his. Something he can stand up in. Neville looked at him for a long moment. He doesn't know you exist, he said. I mean, he knows you exist. But he doesn't know who you've become. No, Harry said. That's going to be, I know, Harry said. I've thought about that too. Luna, who had been eating a piece of toast with the serenity of someone attending a pleasant morning rather than a pivotal strategic conversation, said, he's going to cry. Just so you're prepared. All right, Harry said. And then he's going to laugh, she said. And then he won't know what to do with himself for about a week. And then he'll be, very steady. Underneath all the years, he's very steady. Harry looked at her. You can see all that? Just the shape of it, she said. Like a painting covered in dust. You can tell what it is even through the grime. He sent the Gringotts letter before he left breakfast. The response confirming the emergency session date came back by Thursday, the 15th of December, at the Ministry of Magic, in the main Wisengamot chamber. 2 days before the Hogwarts Christmas break. Harry would be required to attend in person and to formally present his petition. The minister had been notified. Amelia Bones had confirmed her testimony. Ragnarok would attend as his legal representative. Harry went to McGonagall's office on Thursday afternoon and knocked. Come in, she said, in the tone of someone who had not been expecting him but also was no longer surprised when he appeared. He told her the date and the situation. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the things he respected most about her. She processed first and responded from a position of understanding. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at the papers on her desk. I'll need to inform the headmaster, she said. I've already told him, Harry said. This morning. He's going to attempt to accompany me and I've told him I'd appreciate his presence in an advisory capacity but I'll be conducting the session myself. McGonagall looked at him. The expression on her face was one he'd been seeing more frequently from the staff who had started adjusting their mental model of who Harry Potter was, a combination of professional assessment and something more personal that she kept very contained. Harry, she said, which was unusual. She mostly used Potter. Are you certain about the December timeline? If the session goes poorly, it won't, he said. You can't know. I know Amelia Bones, from everything documented about her, is thorough, honest, and angry about this specific injustice, Harry said. I know the legal case for wrongful imprisonment is unambiguous, even the ministry's own preliminary review confirms there was no trial. I know the Wisengamot is going to be significantly more anxious about what I do with those 5 seats than about whether Sirius Black spends another year in Azkaban. He paused. The anxiety about me is the lever. It doesn't feel good to say that but it's accurate. McGonagall looked at him for another long moment. You've thought about the ethical dimension of that, she said. Every day since September, he said honestly. She nodded. That seemed to satisfy something. I'll have your absence from the last day of classes noted as excused. He thanked her and left. The 10 days before the session were not quiet. 3 things happened in that period, none of them entirely expected and none of them catastrophic, but all of them requiring attention. The first was a letter from Lucius Malfoy, this one considerably less controlled than the previous one. It was addressed formally but the language inside had developed hairline cracks, carefully maintained fury beginning to show through the mortar. He had, apparently, learned about the DMLE review and the Wisengamot session and was making clear, through the precise language of a man whose political machinery was very good, that certain parties would view this development with significant concern. The phrasing certain parties was doing substantial work. It meant Voldemort's remaining supporters in the Wisengamot, and there were several, people who had claimed Imperius and been believed and had spent 10 years consolidating the positions they'd retained. Harry wrote back, Dear Mr. Malfoy, thank you for your continued correspondence. The Wisengamot session is a procedural matter regarding a specific case of unlawful imprisonment. The concerns of the parties you reference are noted. Lord Emery's. 12 words of reply to 3 pages of threat. He'd learned from Ragnarok that brevity communicated confidence more reliably than volume. The second thing was Neville, who came to him on a Wednesday evening in the first week of December with a letter from Augusta Longbottom in his hand and an expression that was navigating something complicated. Gran wants to meet you, Neville said. Before the session. She has, she has things she wants to say. About the session? About everything, Neville said. He held out the letter. She wrote to me, but it's really to you. She doesn't have your direct address. Harry took it. Augusta Longbottom's handwriting was exactly what he'd imagined, precise, heavily black, no wasted strokes. She wrote that she had followed his activities with attention since September and had developed opinions which she believed would be of mutual value. She wrote that the session was appropriate and necessary and that she had waited a long time for someone to call it. She wrote, in the second-to-last paragraph, with the abruptness of someone who had decided to say something and was saying it without softening, "My son and his wife were friends of your parents. Frank Longbottom was James Potter's partner for 2 years before Azkaban. I have thought of what should have been done differently for 10 years. I am glad someone is finally doing it." Harry refolded the letter carefully. "Can she come to Hogwarts?" "She's on the Wizengamot," Neville said. "She'd be at the session anyway. But she'd want to, before the day of," Harry said. "We'll arrive together. If she's willing." Neville looked at him with something that was quiet and deep and had nothing to do with first-year school politics. "She's going to love you," he said. "She's going to absolutely hate how much she loves you, because you're 11 and that will offend her sensibilities, but she's going to love you." "I'll try to be worth it," Harry said. "You already are," Neville said, simply, and went back to his herbology essay. The third thing was the Quirrell situation, which had reached a point of visible deterioration. By the first week of December, Quirrell was missing meals, his classroom performance had become erratic, and twice Harry had felt the Slytherin connection track him moving through the lower passages at night, not toward the chamber, because he still couldn't open it, but toward other passages, other access points, restless and increasingly desperate. The possession was accelerating. Whatever Voldemort was doing with Quirrell's body, it was consuming it faster than it had in October. Harry told Dumbledore. Dumbledore said he was watching. Harry believed him but watched also, because watching himself was not something he was prepared to stop doing just because someone else was watching too. He also, in this period, began practicing something specific. The Emery's magic. He'd been careful with it all term, touching it only when it surfaced of its own accord, which it did sometimes in moments of stress or deep focus, a vast warmth coming up from somewhere foundational and then receding. He hadn't tried to direct it deliberately, partly because the texts were clear that the Emery's magic was not a tool in the conventional sense. It was more like bedrock. The underlying stratum of everything else. You didn't wield bedrock. You built on it. But the session was 2 weeks away, and the session was going to require something. Not force, he didn't intend to coerce anyone. But wait. The Wizengamot chamber was going to be full of people with political agendas and ancient habits and the particular defensiveness of those who have been doing things wrong for long enough to have convinced themselves it was right. He needed them to feel the full scale of what they were sitting across from. He practiced in the Chamber of Secrets, because it was the only place in the school where he could exercise magic at that level without the castle's own enchantments interfering. He sat in the center of the chamber with the basilisk asleep at the far end and the mirror against the wall, and he reached down into the emery stratum and let it come up. The first time he did it fully, the water in the channel across the chamber floor rippled outward from him in a perfect circle without him touching it, and the carved serpents on the walls turned their stone heads toward him simultaneously, and the basilisk opened its sealed eyes toward the sound of something it recognized from before its own memory. The second time, the chamber lit up, not with his lumos, not with any cast light, but with the ambient luminescence of very old magic activating in a space that had been built to contain it. Warm gold and cold silver, threaded through the stone, the whole chamber pulsing once like a heartbeat. The third time, he simply sat in it and let it be what it was, and understood something that the texts had described but that he hadn't previously understood from the inside. The Emery's magic wasn't a greater version of the other 4 lordship magics. It was the thing that the other 4 were expressions of. Like the other 4 were languages, and Emery's was the capacity for language itself. He came back from the chamber on the 4th practice evening and Hermione looked at him across the common room and said, "Your eyes are doing something." What something? There, brighter, she said. Not your eyes specifically. More like, there's something behind them that wasn't as visible before. He thought about how to describe it. Have you ever been in a room when someone very powerful walks in? And before they say anything you just know? I've read about that, she said. The magical presence effect. Seen your aurors develop it. Very powerful witches and wizards, it's not a skill, he said. It's just, what happens when you stop containing something. She looked at him carefully, with the particular quality of attention she gave things she was trying to understand from first principles. Are you all right? Better than all right, he said honestly. I feel like I've been walking around in shoes 2 sizes too small and I've finally taken them off. She processed that. That's a very strange metaphor. The sensation is strange, he said. It's the best I can do. She went back to her book. Then, without looking up, don't let anyone tell you to put the shoes back on. No one could, he said. She smiled at her textbook, which was the specific smile she used when she was pleased and didn't want to make a thing of it. The 15th of December was sharp and clear, the sky an intense winter blue that made the castle look cut from pale stone. Harry was up before the rest of the dormitory, dressed in his formal robes, the best set from Madame Malkin's, deep green with silver trim, the Potter Emery's ring on his right hand, with the 5 lordship letters in his breast pocket and the sword of Gryffindor in the inner robe pocket. He went down to the common room. Hermione was there, in her regular uniform because she wasn't attending the session but was very clearly planning to wait in this chair until he came back. Neville was there too, also in regular clothes, and he stood up when Harry came down and said, Gran is meeting you at the ministry side entrance at 9. She said tell you she's looking forward to it. I bet she is, Harry said. She also said, Neville stopped. His jaw worked. She said Frank would have been proud. She said it into her letter and then I think she crossed it out and then she uncrossed it because she decided it was true and ought to be said. Harry stood very still for a moment. In the firelight, with his friends around him and the castle humming at the edges of his awareness and the December morning beginning outside the windows, he felt the weight of everything that had been arranged across his life without his knowledge, all the pieces that had been moving since before he was born, and he felt it not as burden but as responsibility. As the thing that was his to carry and therefore, in some important way, his. Tell her thank you, he said. Luna was in the corner, which was where Luna sometimes materialized when things were important. She was wearing her lion earrings and her expression was the one she used when she was reading something that was happening rather than something on a page. The wind is very strong today, she said. Everything is going to move. Yes, Harry said. He picked up his bag, squeezed Hermione's shoulder once as he passed, she put her hand over his briefly and let go, and walked through the portrait hole into the castle. The Gryffindor quarter was awake around him as he walked, the stone tracking him with its warm attentive awareness. At the entrance hall he paused, one hand on the great doors, and felt the whole castle for a moment, all 4 quarters, the living thing that Hogwarts was, the 1,000 years of magic in the walls. The Gryffindor quarter warm and leonine. The Slytherin quarter cold and precise, the basilisk asleep in its chamber, the mirror keeping its counsel. The Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff quarters dormant but present, waiting. I'll be back tonight, he told the castle, which was not something he'd done before but felt correct. The castle hummed once in acknowledgement. He pushed the doors open and walked into the December morning. Augusta Longbottom was exactly what he'd expected, a tall, upright woman with a formidable jaw and sharp eyes behind a somewhat alarming hat that had a stuffed vulture on it, which she wore with complete unself-consciousness. She was standing at the ministry side entrance at 7 minutes to 9 and she looked at Harry coming toward her across the ministry courtyard with the assessment of a woman who had been in the Wisengamot for 23 years and had developed very precise opinions about people. She looked at him for about 4 seconds. Then she said, "You're shorter than I expected." "People say that," Harry said. And then they stopped saying it. Her mouth moved. It might have been a smile. "Augusta Longbottom," she said, extending her hand. He shook it. Firm grip. Harry Potter. I know who you are, she said, somewhat tartly. Then, Lord Emery's. Lord Emery's, he agreed. They walked into the ministry together. She moved with the authority of someone who had been coming to this building for decades, and people stepped aside for her, and then stepped aside more when they saw Harry at her side and registered the ring and the robes and the quality of the mourning that seemed to have accompanied him inside. Ragnarok was waiting in the atrium, with 2 Gringotts solicitor goblins and a briefcase full of documents that had been assembled with the methodical thoroughness of people who had been preparing legal cases for 600 years. He looked at Harry and nodded once. Harry nodded back. The session begins at 10, Ragnarok said. We have an hour. There are 3 things we should review. They found a conference room off the atrium, Augusta Longbottom joining them because she had information and made that clear without asking permission to be included, which Harry appreciated because it was exactly the right instinct, and spent the hour with the documents. Harry asked questions. Ragnarok answered them. Augusta Longbottom corrected 2 assumptions Harry had made about Wisengamot procedure and then looked slightly startled when he thanked her and immediately incorporated the corrections rather than defending the original position. You take correction well, she said, as if this were an unusual trait worth noting. I'm wrong sometimes, Harry said. When I am, I'd rather know. She looked at him. My grandson said you were different, she said. I thought he was exaggerating. Neville doesn't exaggerate, Harry said. He's one of the most accurate people I've met. Augusta Longbottom looked at him for a long moment with something that was private and significant and that she didn't say out loud, which he respected. Some things were hers to keep. Right, she said. Let's go over the chamber seating. The Wisengamot chamber was a large, circular room with tiered seating in dark wood and the specific atmosphere of a place where significant things had been decided and some of them had been decided badly. 52 seats for Wisengamot members, currently occupied by 49, 3 vacancies, which included 2 of the seats that had been subject to the vote freeze Harry had filed in October. At the center, a chair with a high back and the weight of official proceedings. At the front, the Chief Warlock's position, currently occupied by Albus Dumbledore, who was there when Harry entered and who met his eyes with an expression that was composed and warm and something else underneath, something that was watching. Cornelius Fudge was in the minister's box, wearing his lime-green robes and the expression of a man who had decided the best way to handle today was to look appropriately solemn and agree with whatever the documented facts required. Umbridge was beside him, in pink, with her smile and her clipboard, writing things that Harry resolved to find out about. Amelia Bones was at the prosecution table, which was what her role today technically constituted. She was a square-faced woman with a monocle and close-cropped gray hair and the contained energy of someone who had been angry about something for a long time and was finally in a room where the anger had a legal channel. She looked at Harry as he entered, assessed him in one sweep, and gave him a single nod. He nodded back. The rest of the Wisengamot was watching him come in. He walked to the petitioner's position, center floor, visible to all 52 seats, and he felt them processing. The green robes, the ring, the youth of him, and the quality that Hermione had described as something behind his eyes. He let them feel it. He'd spent 4 evenings in the Chamber of Secrets not learning to hide it. Dumbledore called the session to order with the formal words of ancient law, and the chamber quieted. The emergency session is called under Emery's lordship authority, Dumbledore said, by Lord Harry James Potter, Lord of the most ancient houses of Potter, Peverell, Gryffindor, Slytherin, and Emery's, in the matter of the imprisoned individual Sirius Orion Black, and in related matters pertaining to legal procedure and Wisengamot record-keeping. He paused. Lord Emery's, the floor is yours. Harry stepped forward. He didn't have notes. He'd considered notes and decided they were the wrong approach for this room. Notes suggested preparation against uncertainty. He wasn't uncertain. He knew what the facts were and he knew what the law required and he knew this room, not from experience but from everything he'd read, and reading was, for Harry Potter, not a pale substitute for experience but a form of it. Thank you, Chief Warlock, he said. Members of the Wiesengemot. I'll be brief, because the situation is simple, and simplicity is more honest than elaboration in cases like this. He looked around the room. 49 faces in tiered seats, ranging from attentive to wary to calculatedly neutral. Sirius Black has been imprisoned in Azkaban since November 1981, he said. He has been imprisoned for 12 years. In those 12 years, the Wiesengemot, this body, in this chamber, has not held a formal hearing for him. No evidence was formally presented. No testimony was given. No veritaserum was administered. A single processing order, signed by one official under emergency provisions that were not intended for this use, is the entirety of the legal basis for 12 years of Dementor exposure. He let that sit for a moment. I am not here to assign blame for individual failures, he said. I am here because he is my godfather, because he was my father's closest friend, and because what happened to him was a failure of the law this body exists to uphold. He paused. I am also here because the failure of process in his case was not isolated. It was symptomatic of a period in which emergency powers were being used to skip due process for individuals considered inconvenient to process. Which means if it happened to Sirius Black, it may have happened to others. Which means this body has an obligation to look. Several faces in the tiered seats shifted. He noticed which ones. Director Bones will present the documentary evidence, he continued. It is thorough and unambiguous. I will ask this body for 3 things: an emergency release order for Sirius Black pending formal hearing, the scheduling of that formal hearing within 60 days, and an audit of the emergency provision imprisonments from October through December 1981. He looked around the room again. The audit is not optional. It is required under founding charter law when an Emery's petition reveals systematic procedural failure. I have the relevant clause. Ragnarok, from the gallery, produced a copy of the relevant clause, which had been prepared in triplicate. Harry stepped back. Director Bones. Amelia Bones stood up and the room shifted, because Amelia Bones with a full case file and legal standing was a formidable thing to sit across from. She was precise and relentless and entirely unemotional in the way of someone who had removed every personal element from her presentation and kept only the documented facts, which were damning enough on their own. Harry sat in the petitioner's chair and watched the Wiesengemot receive the facts. He watched which faces accepted them and which faces were calculating. He watched Fudge, whose expression was moving through stages of visible discomfort as Bones laid out the procedural failures one by one. He watched Umbridge, who was writing on her clipboard without looking up, and who was the only person in the room whose attention didn't seem divided. She was focused with a specificity that was its own kind of alert. He watched Dumbledore, who was chairing the session with impeccable neutrality and whose eyes, when they met Harry's for a moment, carried something that was, approval, perhaps, but more than that. Something like recognition. The presentation took 45 minutes. Then there were questions from Wiesengemot members, some procedural and some attempts to create doubt that Bones dismantled with the ease of someone who had anticipated every angle. Then there was a recess of 20 minutes during which Harry stood with Ragnarok and Augusta Longbottom in a side corridor and Augusta said nothing for the first 5 minutes, which was her processing time, and then said, "You handled that well." "The case handled itself," Harry said. "I just made sure there was a case." "The audit," she said. "You know what that will uncover." "Some of it," he said. "I have a list of names from the emergency provisions period that need reviewing. Ragnarok has the same list. We're not looking to make a political spectacle. We're looking to correct a record. Some of those names have families in this building," she said. "I know," Harry said. "But the families of wrongly imprisoned people also have families who've been living with that for 12 years. He looked at her steadily. "Justice doesn't stop being necessary because it's inconvenient." Augusta Longbottom looked at him for a long moment. The stuffed vulture on her hat was incongruously still in the corridor's draft. "Your father," she said, "used to argue like this. Without heat, without theater. Just the point, repeated until the room had no more arguments against it. She paused. It was infuriating. Effective, though, Harry said. Deeply, she said. And didn't say anything else, because they were being called back in. The vote took 11 minutes. 31 to 14, with 4 abstentions, in favor of an emergency release order for Sirius Black. The audit was mandated under the founding charter clause and required no vote, merely acknowledgement, which Dumbledore provided with the formal language of ancient law. The formal hearing was scheduled for the 28th of January. When the votes were counted and recorded and the session formally adjourned, the chamber noise rose immediately, voices, debate, people talking to each other with the particular urgency of those who had just watched something significant happen and needed to process it with people who shared their perspective. Harry stood in the center of the floor while the room recalibrated around him and felt the emery's magic settle back from the surface into its deeper stratum, unhurried, like tide going out. He'd needed it today, not to coerce or compel, just to be fully present in that room, fully the thing he was, and let the room know it. Amelia Bones was at his elbow. A word, she said. They moved to the edge of the chamber floor, away from the main noise. The audit, she said, low and direct. You know what you're asking me to do. Yes, Harry said. I'm asking you to do your job without political interference, which is what you've been trying to do for years. Something moved in her expression, not surprise, but a sharp recognition. I have been watching this department be managed around me since 1988, she said. Cases that should have been pursued quietly filed. Evidence that should have been tested quietly set aside. Not always. But enough. She looked at him steadily. You've just given me the legal framework to stop having those conversations and start acting instead. Yes, Harry said. Fudge is going to push back, she said. Yes, Harry said. And you're going to document every instance of pushback, and if it rises to obstruction you're going to use the founding charter framework I've established today to escalate over him. He paused. I'd also recommend writing to Gringotts directly when you have cases that need independent legal review. Ragnarok's team is thorough and entirely uninterested in ministry politics. Bones looked at him for a moment. You're 11, she said, not the way Fudge said it, as a way of dismissing, but as a genuine observation, almost wondering. Yes, Harry said. Right, she said. She extended her hand. He shook it. Her grip was a great deal like Augusta Longbottom's. I'm going to go get Sirius Black out of Azkaban tonight. Tonight? Harry said. The order is signed, she said. Every hour he spends there after a signed release order is another hour of wrongful imprisonment. Her expression was entirely without ambiguity. I've already sent my senior order. He'll be out by midnight. Harry looked at her for a moment. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, she said. This is the job. She turned and walked away, already moving with purpose, already making this about the work rather than the moment. Dumbledore found him in the corridor outside the chamber as the building emptied around them. That was, Dumbledore said, extraordinary. He said it without the grandfatherly warmth, without the managed effect. He said it as one person saying something true to another. I want you to know, there have been several moments this term where I have observed you do something that I could not have managed at your age, and some of those moments I have found privately humbling. Harry looked at him. You've had things I didn't have, he said. More time. More experience. Better mentorship than I got. He paused. I don't think this is about who's more capable. I think it's about what we were each given to work with. You were given very little, Dumbledore said. No, Harry said. I was given exactly what I needed. It just wasn't given by the people who should have given it. He thought of the cupboard. The watches. The talent for noticing. Adversity is a terrible teacher but it's thorough. Dumbledore was quiet. The matters that remain, he said. Quirrell. The stone. The timeline you believe is moving. Before Christmas, Harry said. He's running out of host. He'll make the move in the next week or 10 days. And what will you do? Whatever's necessary, Harry said. I'd rather do it with you, if you're available. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. I will be available, he said. I give you my word. Harry nodded. The Elder Wand, he said, because it needed to be said here, in this corridor, while they were being honest. When this is over. The Peveril heir has a claim. Dumbledore's expression worked through something complex. I know, he said. I have known since September that the return of the Emry's lordship would eventually mean, yes. He was quiet. I will not pretend the prospect is simple for me. I have carried that wand for 50 years. It has become, he paused, something that I have perhaps held more tightly than I should have. I'm not asking for it now, Harry said. I'm asking you to think about what it means to hold it so tightly. To a Peveril, the Elder Wand is an acknowledgement of power. Not a source of it. He met the old man's eyes. Your power isn't in that wand. It never was. Dumbledore looked at him with the expression he'd worn in the chamber session, recognition, and something that lived very close to gratitude, in the way that people feel gratitude for things that cost them something. Perhaps, he said, we should have this conversation properly. Over tea. When things are less immediate. Yes, Harry said. When this is over. They walked out of the ministry into the December afternoon, into the cold brightness of a London that didn't know what had happened in that chamber and didn't need to, and somewhere to the north, in Azkaban, the paperwork for Sirius Black's release was being processed by people who had signed off on an emergency order that had come from the highest legal authority in magical Britain, and it was too late in the day for anyone to slow it down. He got back to Hogwarts by 4 in the afternoon and the castle received him the way it always did now, with the particular warmth of a place that has learned to know someone. He went to Gryffindor Tower and told them. Hermione had questions, she had always had questions and the quality of them had only improved over the term. Neville sat very quietly while he talked and then sat quietly afterward, and Harry understood that this particular quiet contained something about his own parents and the related injustice that hadn't been addressed yet and wouldn't be today but was there, and Harry was aware of it. He would come back to it. He kept lists. Luna said, when he finished, he's getting in a car tonight. A ministry car. He's going to look at the sky the whole way and not say anything. Serious? He hasn't seen a sky properly in 12 years, she said. He'll want to look at it. Harry thought about that. About a man who had been locked away in the dark and what it would feel like to see a sky again. He thought about his own cupboard and the watch and the particular talent for invisible endurance that you develop when you have no other option, and he thought that he and his godfather might understand each other quite well when the time came. He went to his dormitory and wrote a letter. Short, careful, the most important letter he'd written all year. He addressed it to Sirius Black, temporarily in Ministry Medical Care, please forward through Gringotts Post. He wrote, Dear Sirius, my name is Harry. You're my godfather and I've been working on getting you out since September. You'll receive better information from Madame Bones and from Ragnarok at Gringotts, who is your legal representative from today. There's a house in the Scottish borders, the third property listed in the Peveril estate, the one that's warm and private, and it's yours to use for as long as you need it. I'll come and see you during the Christmas holidays. There's a great deal to tell you and I'm looking forward to it. James and Lily's son, who has been busy on your behalf. He sealed it with the Emry seal, which was not subtle but was the seal most likely to ensure it was treated with appropriate urgency, and sent it through Gringotts that evening. 6 days later, on a Tuesday the 21st of December, the last day before Christmas break, the day most students were packing and the castle was loud with the particular joy of impending departure, Harry was in the corridor on the 3rd floor, at 20 minutes past 11 at night, wearing the invisibility cloak. He was there because the Slytherin awareness had woken him at 11 with the sharp clarity of a signal, not a curiosity but an alarm, tracking something moving through the lower school with the purposefulness of someone who was finally committing to the thing they'd been planning for months, Quirrell was heading for the chamber. Harry had the cloak off before he reached the second-floor bathroom. There was no point in hiding. Whatever was about to happen, it was going to happen directly. He was in the bathroom when Quirrell arrived. The man, the remnant of him, stopped when he saw Harry standing by the sinks, and then stopped being Quirrell entirely. The stammer, the anxiety, the human performance dropped away, and what was underneath looked out through eyes that had gone a flat, ancient red. "Lord Emrys," said Voldemort, through Quirrell's ruined mouth. "Lord Voldemort," Harry said. "You knew I'd come tonight." "I've known for 3 weeks that the timeline was this week," Harry said. "Tonight specifically because you're out of time. Quirrell is failing. I can see it from here." He could. The man's face was paper-thin, the magic holding him together fraying at the edges, the body running on borrowed time and a will that wasn't its own. "You'll open the chamber," Voldemort said. "Not a question." "No," Harry said. "You understand that I can compel, you can't," Harry said. "The chamber responds to Parseltongue and Lordship magic. You can't compel Lordship magic. That's why it exists." He looked at Quirrell's face steadily. "You've known this for 2 months. You've been looking for another angle because this one was always closed. Then I will destroy this host and find another." "Quirrell is still in there," Harry said. He said it quietly, not for effect but because it was true and truth required acknowledgement. "He's diminished but he's present. I know you don't care about that. But I do." Something moved in the flat red eyes. Not humanity, Harry didn't credit it with that, but a recognition that he was speaking accurately. "The professor," Voldemort said, "is beyond recovery. Whatever remains of him has chosen this path. He was manipulated into it," Harry said. "Everyone is manipulated into their path," Voldemort said. "You were manipulated into yours." "Yes," Harry said. "And I changed mine the moment I had the means. That's the difference." The bathroom was very still. The chamber entrance was behind Harry, sealed. The Peveril warning was very loud now, a steady pulse, and the Emrys magic was up from its stratum and fully present, and Harry felt the full weight of it without trying to contain it, the 5 lordships and the 9 centuries of dormant Merlinline power and the particular thing that happened when you put all of that in one 11-year-old body and pushed. Voldemort felt it. He felt it very clearly. And what Harry saw in the flat red eyes, for one instant, before the mask came back, was fear. Not of the power. Of the person wielding it. "This isn't over," Voldemort said. "I know," Harry said. "But tonight it is." He stepped forward and put his hand on Quirrell's arm. The effect was immediate and total. The touch of the Emrys magic, the foundational thing, the bedrock, the opposite of the fractured horror of a split soul, against a body that was being used as a vessel for Voldemort's remnant was like putting a hand to a candle flame. Not to him. To the soul fragment living in Quirrell's skull. Voldemort screamed. Not through Quirrell's mouth, through the air itself, a sound without a throat behind it, the sound of something that is not supposed to be separated from its physical anchor being separated very suddenly and very completely. Quirrell collapsed. Harry caught him before he hit the tile and lowered him carefully, because regardless of what Quirrell had done, he was a person and he deserved to reach the floor gently. Voldemort's remnant, the smoke and the red and the cold, tore through the bathroom wall and was gone, up through the stone, into the night, dispersed and diminished and temporarily nowhere. Harry knelt on the bathroom floor with Quirrell and pulled his wand and cast the most comprehensive diagnostic charm he knew, learned from a St. Mungo's medical manual he'd read in September for exactly this kind of eventuality. The results were not good, the damage to Quirrell's body was severe, the prolonged possession having left the kind of marks that weren't easily reversible. But he was alive. Harry cast a warming charm and a stabilizing spell and then he did something he'd been told in the medical manual was extremely advanced for any non-healer. He reached through the Peveril connection, through the aspect of that lordship that was about life and death and the borderline between them, and he pushed warmth into Quirrell's failing systems the way you push warmth into someone who is very cold. Not a cure. Not a reversal of the damage. Just, enough. Enough to keep the candle lit until someone qualified arrived. Then he summoned Dumbledore. Not with words or a Patronus, he simply reached through the Gryffindor quarters awareness, through the castle itself, and found Dumbledore in his office 3 floors up and pushed the alarm. It was the castle's emergency function, something that had existed for 1,000 years for exactly this purpose, and it worked in 6 seconds, the sound of footsteps on the stairs and then in the corridor, and then Dumbledore was in the doorway of the girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor, silver wandlit, eyes sweeping the room. He saw Harry on the floor beside Quirrell. He saw the state of Quirrell's body. He saw the state of the magic in the room, the dispersal residue, the empty vessel quality that a body left behind when its parasite was ejected. He came forward quickly and took over the stabilization with the ease of someone who had been a healer in a previous chapter of his life, his magic considerably more precise than Harry's in this specific application. "He's gone," Dumbledore said. "Dispersed," Harry said. "Not destroyed. But no body, no anchor, and significantly weakened." He stood up. "It'll take him time to recover. Months at minimum. More likely longer." Dumbledore looked up at him from where he knelt over Quirrell. "What did you do?" he asked. "To expel him, the Horcrux bond should have made that, Emery's," Harry said simply. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, the nod of someone filing information they'll need to think about for a long time. "I need to get him to Madame Pomfrey," he said. "And then to St. Mungo's." "I know," Harry said. "Are you hurt?" Harry checked himself with the directness of someone who had learned to inventory their own condition. "No," he said. "I'm fine." Dumbledore looked at him for a moment with the fullest expression of the evening, all the monitoring and management and half-truths stripped back to something unguarded and genuine. "Go to bed, Harry," he said. "You've done enough for one night." Harry picked up the cloak from the floor where he'd dropped it. "Merry Christmas," he said. The corner of Dumbledore's mouth moved. "Merry Christmas," he said. "Get some sleep." Harry went back to Gryffindor Tower, climbed through the portrait hole into the warm firelit common room, took off his robes, and sat by the dead fire for a while in the quiet. The castle was calm around him. All 4 quarters, warm and attentive. The Peveril warning pulse had gone silent, properly silent for the first time since October, the absence of it like the absence of a background noise you've lived with so long you stop noticing it and only recognize it's gone when the quiet arrives. He was 11 years old. He'd just expelled Voldemort from a human host using magic that hadn't been active in 9 centuries, he'd freed his godfather from illegal imprisonment, he'd reorganized the Wisengamot's procedural obligations, and he had a full term of Hogwarts ahead of him and a great deal of homework that was now technically overdue. He thought about Sirius Black looking at a sky. He thought about Amelia Bones walking out of a courtroom with purpose. He thought about Neville's spine getting straighter every week. He thought about Hermione's face when she thought he wasn't watching her be proud of something. He thought about his mother's handwriting in the margins of the Emery's archive book, small and precise and occasionally impatient, and the little phoenix that rolled its eyes. The fire was cold. He was tired. He went to bed. The castle kept watch while he slept, all 4 quarters of it, warm and steady and awake, the way a house does when the people inside it are finally, properly home.